So this is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the millennial that's back is
I'm back.
Garrick Ross. He's back.
He's
He's 10. He's rested from law school. He has a day off.
I am not rested. I am falling all over. I'm kidding. I'm having a good time, but it's good to be back with you all because today is the penultimate day in American politics. We have the presidential election, and this is going to be a hell of a presidential election.
Yes, it is. And we're going to thank, of course, Adam Katora, as well as Christopher Hopkins, who's here, who put all of this equipment together today. And believe me, it is very intricate. It took 2 hours to do, so thank you, Christopher Hopkins. We really appreciate it. Great job.
The man of the hour.
And we have breaking news about the presidential election. You won't believe this, but Washington, D.C. went for Joe Biden. We really can't believe it.
I am thrown, Mark.
I'm absolutely so sad that happened.
I thought this was the chance. If anybody could break into that D plus 90 state, it was going to be Trump.
So Washington, D.C. is called for Joe Biden. And that's why I guess the Democrats want to make it a state, right? They want to make Washington, D.C. a state, particularly if they get control of the House and the Senate and the presidency, because, hey, that way they have a reliable, 3 electoral votes plus the 2 new senators, which would be 5 electoral
reliable Democrat senators.
Yes, absolutely.
From a very progressive city.
Absolutely. The same city, by the way, that's completely and utterly boarded up.
Yes.
Is boarded up.
Yes, and you may, and I don't like to play into the whole fodder of this, but you may ask, why are American City boarded up right now? Yeah. It's certainly not because the famed Republicans of D.C. are going to take to the streets if Trump loses. So they're going
to take to the streets and they're going to say, "Oh my gosh!"
All 10 of them, and then they're going to go home.
So they're talking about Florida, of course, and it sure looks to me like
it's looking real good, Mark.
85% of Florida votes are in, but not all of the Panhandle votes. And as we all know,
that'll probably
the Panhandle of Florida. They're an hour behind, so their actual polls close a little bit later.
Yes.
I think in this case,
8:30.
Yeah, I think they do, and it sure looks to me like Florida is really firming up for Donald Trump.
It's going to be at least a 2 to 3 point victory there,
which would be a lot easier than it was with Hillary Clinton.
Yes. So I think one of the good things that Trump has done, and in terms of growing his tent, there's a lot of talk about whether Trump's lost votes or gained votes over the last however many years, the last 4 years. But I think he's actually done a lot of good things, making inroads with the Latino community, and specifically the Latinos of Florida, which are very conservative. I mean, the Cuban population there is enormous. A lot of the South American country, those immigrants who come to Florida, he's done a lot of good things to embrace them.
One part because so many of the immigrants are not just from Cuba only, but also from Venezuela.
Yeah, want to escape that leftist policy agenda.
And in other cases, other banana republics, of course, in Central and South America, and they go to Miami, which is understandable.
Yeah.
And because there's a large Hispanic population. And as they start to pay attention, once they become citizens of the United States, they start to pay attention to the national politics of the United States. They realize, wait a minute, the Democrat Party is actually the party that's promoting
these policies that we want to leave. I tend not to.
We left to get away from that.
I don't like to bring my family up because it's very anecdotal. But my sister, she's in a relationship with somebody who is a Cuban refugee. He came here.
That's cool.
About a couple of years ago with his sister, and he just, when he sees some of the national political conversations, he doesn't understand because he's like, I came from that. I've seen where this all goes, and I don't want that to happen here. He's like, so anecdotally, when he goes back to visit his family in Cuba, he goes to Walgreens the day before to pick up ibuprofen, Tylenol, Mucinex, just like these general things that you and I all take for granted every day because his family can't get it there.
It's not available.
Nothing.
Yeah, but wait a minute. Don't they have nationalized health care in Cuba? I thought everything was supposed to be available and free, especially in Marxism.
That's what Bernie said. At least they had universal education.
Yeah, I thought in Marxism, in perfect Marxist societies, there would be plenty of everything, and it would be free.
No, if you're rich, if you're in the
there is plenty
political
of everything,
elite,
but it's nothing.
If your last name's Castro, you're good to go.
Yeah, exactly. It's always in Marxism. The government officials always do real well.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody else, not so well. In fact, they're incredibly poor. They get poorer. So 86% of the vote is in for Florida, and I got to stop burping.
Mark's excited, guys.
So from the cigar, go ahead.
So another thing why I'm very excited for this is I in my prior life to law school, I was very involved in the political data process. Election results, political data modeling, and so for me, it's like a strokes my nerddom. I really enjoy the numerical analysis that goes into election day. And when I'm looking at the map, and this is for everybody at home, I think this is not going to be a blowout in either direction. I think it's going to be a very close election. And there's really 3 states that I'm looking at. I'm looking at Arizona, which, based on a lot of the early voting and absentee ballot returns, I think is going to be a Trump state pretty easily. So that takes me to North Carolina and Pennsylvania. And I think those 2 states are going to decide the election. I am pretty optimistic based on some of the numbers I've seen and some of the things I've heard from people connected that Pennsylvania looks really good. But it's North Carolina where in early voting and absentee balloting, the Dems have run up a pretty early lead, and it'll be interesting to see how electoral turnout counters that. And so what you're going to see is really 1 or 2 states that I don't know when they'll be decided, if today or sometime this week, that are really going to be what decides this election and the fate of the country for the next 4 years.
So, it's interesting. Everybody talks about Pennsylvania, naturally, and that's understandable. But my sincere hope is tonight that Trump runs up, of course, Arizona, wins Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, of course, Georgia, because apparently Georgia is potentially in peril, and then wins Michigan clearly. That's what I wanted instead of Pennsylvania. Not because I don't want to win Pennsylvania, but I just know Pennsylvania, the outcome is not going to be known until Friday at the earliest. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that I wanted Michigan until I heard this evening that Detroit, Michigan had 18,000 people who registered to vote today and then voted.
Christ, yeah. I mean,
Detroit.
The turnout in Michigan was absurd on that fact. I mean, Detroit, that's going to be, an 80% Biden city. And the idea that they got 18,000 people registered and voted on the same day, I mean, that
should not be allowed. I have a problem with that.
That's incredible.
And here's what, look, for podcast listeners, here's why I have a problem with that. Because if you allow same-day registration, then essentially what you're saying is to the entire country, hey, look, Michigan and Pennsylvania could determine the outcome of the election. So everybody drive to Michigan today.
Yep.
And then register to vote today and vote there today, even though you don't live there, because they're going to let you register today and vote today. That's why it shouldn't be allowed, because the election board does not have the opportunity to truly verify where you live. They can't verify where you live when you register to vote right there. They just say, well, we're going to let you register to vote and go ahead and cast your ballot.
Yeah, and there's some marginal checks on that, but say you have a second house and you live in Illinois, or you live in Indiana, where it really doesn't matter so much. But you're at any time 2 hours from Michigan. I mean, you can effectively just show up, be like, here's where I live, here's my license, and sign me up.
Exactly. And so they have Florida at 86% reporting Donald Trump's still up. He's up what? I think it was a point and a half, a little bit more than a point and a half in Florida so far, which is over 100,000 votes. And I think that's in large part because the panhandle still has not been completely called in.
He's up 2%. And so if you look at, I'm going to bring back the 18 midterm, the Bill Nelson, Rick Scott election. I mean, Rick Scott only won that election by 0.3 and Ron DeSantis by 0.8. I mean, it's a good sign. And I know part of this is that Trump is at the top of the ticket. There's energy to come and turn out. And a lot of that really is to his popularity among the base in Florida. But he is going to run up a very solid margin that I don't think Democrats are going to be able to overcome, especially so all of their lead would have come from early voting, absentee balloting, because from all the things that I've read, I mean, Republicans have been out at least 2-to-1, 1.5-to-1 ratio on election day in most states.
So I'm just curious. So I'm asking our producer here tonight, Chris. Chris, can podcast listeners comment on Facebook and elsewhere as we're talking? Okay, so I'm asking our podcast listeners to comment on Facebook right now. And here's why. Because did you vote? Tell us on Facebook, did you vote today, the election day? Because I did. And if you did, how long did it take you to vote? For me, in my county, it took me 2.5 hours to vote. I had to wait in line for 2.5 hours before I could finally vote. But I waited to vote until Election Day intentionally because I like to not just to vote on Election Day because I think it's the right thing, but in addition to that, I want to personally scan in my vote and watch that scanner say, your vote has been tabulated.
Yeah.
As opposed to mailing in a ballot, and I don't get that opportunity. Now, I did wait in line for 2.5 hours today. So how many of you voted today? And how long did you wait to vote? Please post that on Facebook. I'm really curious to know. I think that'd be really great to know because we want to record this and let our podcast listeners know when we do our next podcast tomorrow, and or maybe Thursday, depending how long this goes, and just let people know what's going on. Go ahead.
Yeah. Personal story. 2016, I was a freshman in college. I voted absentee. I put it in the mail. I sent it back. It was never recorded in the clerk's office that they ever got my ballot.
So they didn't.
For all intents and purposes, I didn't vote 16.
Oh my gosh! And see, that's on your record too, right? Because it shows. Oh, see, you don't care about voting because it shows here you didn't vote. It's like, no, actually, I voted, but you didn't record my vote because you said you didn't get my absentee ballot, and therein lies the problem.
Or here's the thing: they never counted it because when they got it, because it would have been postmarked pre-election, but when they got it, they looked at the margin. They saw that there was no chance that Trump could win New Jersey. That's where I was registered at the time, and they were just like, "All right, screw it." And it's like, part of me feels like I was cheated in that because it's like, I may not have flipped the election, but I want my vote. I want to register.
Yes.
How I felt about it.
Right then. And so get this, podcast listeners, please let us know on Facebook if you voted today, and if so, why you voted today, why you waited to vote today, and also how long did you wait in line. So my son is voting now, and the polls are officially closed. However, they're allowing anyone who's currently in line to vote. He's been waiting for 2 hours, and the polls are technically closed for any additional people to get in line. So he'll still be allowed to vote. But the fact of the matter is, that's how far behind they are. That's how many people waited in line. And I got to tell you something. In the county that I'm from, I've never seen so many Trump voters in my life in line and just downright upset about what's going on in this country and committed to voting in person. No matter the pandemic, they're in line and they're waiting. And there must have been 2,000 people just at this one precinct.
On the topic of good policy, I understand the concerns of coronavirus, but I understand. I thought, I will say that I think the initiatives that people tried to take to accommodate voting came from a good place, but I didn't think it was sound policy. I mean, if you want less people in, tight environments, interacting with each other to make sure you don't spread coronavirus, you would conceivably want more polling locations, more time or more places, because that way you're not packing people in. Like you're saying, 2,000 people in line. I mean,
how's that good with the pandemic, right?
Maryland has a rule. You can't have more than 150 people in one place at one time, but 2,000 people now got to stand shoulder to shoulder to go vote. It's like, it kind of is counterintuitive.
And the other issue too was, since they lowered the number of places that you could vote, I thought to myself, well, if you are someone who is in a wheelchair or if you need assistance, are they accommodating those people? Now, in theory, you'd say, okay, well, they should mail in their ballot. I would agree with you. They should have gotten an absentee ballot. But in some cases, people didn't because they were so committed. I'm talking about folks who were in wheelchairs and older. They wanted to vote in person.
Yeah, a lot of people really do just feel like it's easier for them because, the polling location's 5 feet from their house. They're working from home. They can go vote in person. It's not a big deal. But now they're waiting 3+ hours in line a lot of people. I heard some anecdotal things I saw this morning. People showed up at 7:30 to vote. 7:30 a.m. in place in Pennsylvania. The polling location wasn't open. There was at least a 2-hour line, and they're like, I got to go to work. So I got to come back after work. So now
Exactly.
their whole day is thrown.
I did that too. I went to, because in our county, we're allowed to vote in any polling station that we want to. Now, that's not the normal situation, but it's because of the pandemic. And then you show up, and I drove to 3 different ones, and they all had lines that were 2 hours plus long. So get this, 88% of the vote is in for Florida, and Donald Trump now has 50.7% of the vote to Joe Biden's 48.5% of the vote. And it looks to me like, what do you say? What's the difference there?
2%, 2.2%.
200,000 comfortable 200,000 vote margin for Donald Trump, and 88% of the vote is in. One would think that's because the panhandle of Florida votes are still coming in. I know I've said that a couple of times, but that's incredibly important because the panhandle of Florida is solid red. Okay, so it's looking pretty bleak for Joe Biden in Florida at the moment, but obviously stay with us because, only 88% of the vote is in.
So here's my thing with Florida. So goes Florida, so goes the South. So now I'm looking
Explain what that means. Why?
Florida is a very good barometer on where a lot of the states in the South are going to go. And this election in particular, there's 2 states in the South that are very up in the air. Georgia, how the polling looked prior to today, as well as South Carolina, how the polling looked, not necessarily in the presidential race, but in the Senate race there. Lindsey Graham's in a tough re-election battle.
Is it because of the spillover of the voters between
they all kind of
Florida and Georgia in particular?
Registration numbers, ideology, things like that. I tend to look at Georgia as a place that's 1 to 2 points ahead of, towards the Republican base of where Florida lands. Now, I think that there are some issues in play that might change that, but I would be more optimistic if I am the Trump campaign that looking at Florida and, I built a 2.5 point lead here with that by all intents and purposes is going to be called now, as opposed to, I believe in 16, it was one of the states that wasn't called until well into the night.
That's exactly right.
It's going to be a short night there in Florida, and you're off to a good start.
You know what's upsetting to me about our demographics in our country with respect to elective politics, okay? Electoral demographics, okay? Follow me on this. Is tonight, they called Kentucky first. They said, okay, Kentucky is for Donald Trump. Okay, that's to be expected. But the second state that they called was the state of Virginia. And if you know anything about the state of Virginia,
this one really kills
you will know that this is a state that was reliably Republican for a very long time. And because of Northern Virginia, and Northern Virginia encircles Washington, D.C., right?
Yep.
Northern Virginia, full of government workers, right? And there are an enormous number of Arab immigrants and, generally speaking, Muslim immigrants from the Middle East in Northern Virginia. A lot of people don't know that. You think of Virginia, you wouldn't think of that, but it is a fact. And also a large number of Hispanic
are
immigrants.
Largely changing very quickly in Northern Virginia.
And so they called, Virginia was the second state to be called for Joe Biden. I mean,
it is a deep blue state that I would argue 4 years ago was probably kind of still purplish. That
it's done.
It's done. I mean,
it's done.
I don't know
a blue state.
Where, unless the Republican Party drastically changes its message, I don't know how you're competitive there.
And here's why that matters. Okay, so if you lived in Maryland, which is right next to Washington D.C. on one side,
it's the same thing.
And then you know people that live in Virginia, which of course you do because the states are right next to each other, separated by Washington D.C. or certainly by the Potomac River. Then one of the things you ask yourself is, you know what, maybe I should move to Virginia. People used to say that like 10, 20 years ago. Lower taxes, better governance, more business friendly.
It's a Democrat state house.
Not anymore.
Governor. Yeah.
Not anymore. Once again, all these people who have moved to Virginia, whoever they may be, they have turned the state into an anti-business state.
Yeah.
And a woke state. I mean, what do? They even, Governor Ralph Northam, Mr. Blackface himself, he decided that he was going to make voter ID illegal in Virginia. No voter ID.
And just as general business policies have been very different, and it impacts a lot of people. It's a good barometer on what happens when some of these red states that turn blue don't realize what they're doing when they make these decisions. They think, this conservative might be a little too far right for me, and they vote for a Democrat. But you're fundamentally re-altering the composition of your state legislatively. I mean, the policies that you can expect. I mean, Virginia contemplated an assault rifle ban. I mean, could you imagine everybody south of Alexandria? I mean, I was there the other day.
It's really two states.
It's really two states.
It's two completely different states.
Very interesting to look at.
Exactly.
And how I feel like I, as somebody who would live in the country there, would feel unrepresented by my government.
That is so true. So well said. Because you have Northern Virginia. It's the tier around Washington, D.C., which is heavily blue, but that's where all the population is.
Yep.
And then you have the rest of the state, which is red. And
it's almost the same thing here in Maryland. I mean, if you look at how much of a percentage of the population the immediate DC suburb is, and how it has so much power in shaping, Maryland's, future. I mean, there's states that are demographically liberal that are, liberal throughout the whole state. But, when you look at states like this, it's one dense pocket of population that is effectively governing the rest of a very, very moderate or very conservative state.
It is. And by the way, podcast listeners, so far tonight, what you're going to see is a repeat of what we saw in 2016. I'm not saying results-wise, but certainly in terms of as the results come in, namely, will the president win Florida? Because Florida's very good at getting its results in pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And then the next state we need to look at is, of course, North Carolina.
Yep.
And then, unfortunately, we have to look at Georgia. If the president brings home Florida, brings home North Carolina and Georgia, then what we need to really focus on is Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, which is a sleeper.
Arizona will be an interesting conversation, but we're not going to hear that until at least 11 o'clock Eastern time.
That's exactly right. So, because he's going to need Arizona to win. However, I think if he won New Hampshire and then Maine's one congressional district, and then he ran the board, he could also. By the way, Arizona's 11 electoral vote, right?
Yeah.
So he could, in theory, win Michigan, and he could win.
If he wins Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona's irrelevant to the
conversation. It doesn't matter. It's exactly right.
There are 4 states, and Trump needs to win 2 of them to win. He needs to win either Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Sorry, it's 5, but it'll really be 4. And then North Carolina and Arizona. I mean, if he gets any 2 of those, he's in a good place.
But I only look idiot the vote. Florida is a solid 200,000 votes ahead.
Yeah.
So he's a little bit more than that. Looks like 250,000 votes ahead. That's significant, ladies and gentlemen.
Shocking news. My home state of New Jersey here has gone for Joe Biden, as expected. That's another one. Some things that matter.
New Jersey is known as a drive-through state. It's like, what exit?
Densely populated, though. Densely populated.
Yes,
a lot of people live there.
It is.
I will say, though, it is interesting to look at a state like New Jersey from a congressional district perspective. I mean, there are a lot of states that may be reliably blue statewide, but the congressional ballot makeup is generally different. Like, look at Illinois. I mean, Illinois has a Republican congressional delegation. New Jersey at one time was 10-1. 10-1, 10 Congress people for the Republican Party, 1 for the Democratic Party. It's now 110. And 2-9 with Jeff Van Drew,
but it also has an enormous immigrant community in northern New Jersey, right outside of New York.
Yes.
Enormous immigrant community.
And a lot of those liberals have now spilled down into a lot of the countryside, because one of the aspects of commuting and travel being a lot more accessible and being able to telework is that people can live anywhere now, and
they can.
And
but back to Florida, do you know Ron DeSantis said, which I thought was really interesting, Rick DeSantis. He said that
that's Ron.
Is it Ron?
It's Ron. Yeah.
Sorry, get me right on this. So the governor of Florida said,
Ronald DeSantis.
He said that 200,000 more Republicans have registered in the state of Florida. So they've closed the Florida gap with the Democrats by 200,000 votes in terms of registration.
From
That's
an
huge.
electoral strategy, the Trump campaign did a very good job for the last 4 years going out and registering new Republicans. And it has been basically,
primarily people that didn't vote.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that is what the Democrats were very good at for a long time. And if you're a Republican, it's encouraging to see the RNC and the Trump campaign take time to actually start registering new voters, because you can't always rely on an old base. You got to bring new people in.
And by the way, they say as Ohio goes or as Iowa goes, so goes the Midwest. They say specifically as Iowa goes, so goes the Midwest. But as Ohio goes, so goes the country.
Yeah, Ohio has picked the president every year since like 1940 something.
And podcast listeners should know that obviously not all the votes are in yet in Ohio, but so far Joe Biden is ahead in Ohio.
I expect to see that margin shrink, though.
We can only hope.
Trump go ahead. We'll go ahead of him. Because what you're going to see is, again, Ohio is one of those states that it counted all of their absentee and early votes ahead of time and then dumped the results as the polls closed. So now you're seeing a lot of these precincts that had election day turnout they're starting to report. So you'll start seeing them kind of shrink that margin, and then probably at some point go ahead.
And how about California? Of course, so California, obviously, it's on the West Coast, the left
coast, as they call it.
And the left coast of California, obviously, the polls are not yet closed there, but I think we can pretty comfortably call California for Joe Biden. However, there have been some massive, and I mean massive, Trump rallies and Trump parades in California, which I think is pretty impressive.
There's another state
that's pretty gutsy.
That I think is almost three. I would say California is 3 states, because if you look at it, like where it got the benefit of being so big. We have
a father who lives in
California. My father lives
in
the mountain chains of the east central part of California, and that is a state where 3 cities, San Francisco, LA, and San Diego, make up a great portion of the population, are able to basically just destroy the rest of the state.
Exactly.
And again, it's so big, it's so huge. I mean, if you look at the coastline there, it's equivalent of going from D.C. to Florida, but on the entire West Coast, and that's one state. And so, again, there's a lot of condensed voters that are put into this one state that don't have representation that they feel fits them.
So I want podcast listeners now, if you can, to basically prognosticate and tell us on Facebook, comment on Facebook, who do you think not just is going to win, but what do you think the electoral votes are going to be for Donald Trump, the count, and what is the electoral vote going to be for Joe Biden? So let us know. I mean, what do you have any ideas?
So again, I mentioned it earlier. I'm looking at 3 states. So prior to a week ago, I was a very large pessimist. I thought this race was going to come down to Pennsylvania. I didn't think that Trump had the infrastructure there to win. I was firmly thinking he was going to go down. But in the last week, with the way certain things changed in turnout, I would be quite optimistic. If not, I wouldn't be shocked if Trump won. I wouldn't be shocked if Biden won. But I think right now I'm leaning towards Trump winning on the EV, but losing the popular vote.
Well, can I tell you something? An hour north of Pittsburgh, Trump did a rally there a few days ago. An hour north of Pittsburgh.
56,000 people.
Did you hear that, podcast listeners?
56,000 people.
56,000. How's that possible? Can you imagine? I mean, organically from the countryside, 56,000 people show up at a rally?
Yeah.
And what did the Democrats say? It's a super spreader event. It shouldn't be allowed.
And here's the thing. He did 10 rallies that day, and every one had a crowd that size, and the tens of thousands of people. So, I saw some people on Twitter, and they were like, well, Romney had big rallies in 2012, and you saw how that turned out. But it was different. Romney had 1 or 2 big rallies,
So Donald Trump has expanded his lead in the state of Florida. So it was a little bit closer, but now it's Trump at 50.8% to Biden's 48.3%. And so the vote margin is increasing for Donald Trump there. That has got to be worrying, I think, to the Biden people who put Kamala in South Florida as well as Obama in South Florida.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I follow for purely research purposes, podcast listeners, do not crucify me here. I do follow the Biden campaign manager on Twitter, and I've been reading some of her press statements. I think that the Biden campaign pretty much mailed in Florida earlier this week, and they knew they weren't going to win it, because she came out today and she said, we don't need Florida to win. And if your campaign manager is coming out and saying that, she sees the writing on the wall. Yeah, they're giving up on it. I think, there's a reason that Biden was there once and Kamala was there the rest of the time.
But boy, do they need Pennsylvania.
And they brought out the big guns, which is very interesting, because it's actually a norm shatterer. The amount of time that Obama spent campaigning on behalf of Biden is unprecedented in modern American politics. So the tradition has been that once a president is out of office, they respect, the new president, and they never go against him, because it's like a fraternity of presidents, but it's also, important in maintaining confidence in the peaceful transition of power. I find it a little in poor taste that he was so involved, because look at Bush. Bush, by all means, should be out there if he was Obama, defending his legacy, righting the ship and what I think was a lot of, false judgments on the things that he did. But he's been quiet. Reagan didn't campaign for Bush Sr. Bush Sr. didn't show up for Dole.
It doesn't
happen. And it is really, truly an unprecedented thing to happen. So it's very interesting to see.
Why do you think Obama did that?
Because I think they really were scared that Trump was going to pull out, a pretty handy win tonight.
I think the real reason Obama has been campaigning is because he's trying to hide his collusion. And he's trying to hide the whole Comey thing. Oh, by the way, podcast listeners, did you know that James Comey today posted on his Twitter account a picture of himself, James Comey, wearing a Biden for president shirt and a Biden for president coffee cup?
I have a theory.
And he looks all coy in the picture. What's the theory?
My theory on it's not even a theory. It is Comey's personality. Comey does not care who wins the presidency. All he cares about is his own self-interest. I think that, opening the Hillary email scandal a couple of days before the election in 2016 was because he was trying to endear himself to Trump because he thought Trump was going to win. And then once he rightly got canned as FBI chief, because there was a lot of things that he did to impact both parties that I thought were improper from your FBI director being involved in the political process, he saw that as hurting his bottom line. So he's just been out for revenge ever since. That man doesn't care about threats to democracy or whoever's president or not president. He just cares about himself. And that is one way that he is, trying to right the wrongs that he committed as FBI director.
So my theory about James Comey posing in his Biden for president t-shirt today on Twitter and posting on Twitter is, my theory is Comey wants Biden to appoint him back to the FBI.
Probably, yeah.
He wants back in. Or he wants back in at some level in the United States government, because he was what's happening in our intelligence agencies and our law enforcement agencies at the highest level, where you have actors like James Comey who've decided that they are not working for the people, but they're actually politicians, and they're trying to weigh in on who wins.
Yeah, that's another thing that I thought was very unprecedented in this administration compared to the last one, is you saw a lot of people who felt that they were independent of the executive, which that's not true. I mean, if you work as a staffer for the State Department or the FBI or the CIA, NSA, whatever it may be, your job is to serve the president, no matter who that person is, not to undermine them at every turn, because you're effectively undermining the confidence in your agency relative to the American people.
Absolutely. So President Trump is still ahead in Florida by more than 250,000 votes. 88% of the vote is in. One would presume, once again, it's the panhandle votes that have not yet been counted. I'm not sure where else in Florida they're holding back the votes. It could be northern Florida potentially. Not really sure why that would be the case, but they're not showing which counties in Florida, other than the panhandle counties, have not called in their vote, which I find interesting. I'd also like to learn more about Ohio, because Ohio is pretty quick also reporting their results.
Yep.
If you notice, by the way, it's always Republican states that are able to, get in their votes really quickly.
Yeah.
But, Pennsylvania, of course, they have a Democrat governor, and he's done everything he can to, of course, use the courts. Do you know, podcast listeners, in the Pennsylvania General Assembly, they passed a bill that said, if your ballot isn't in the day of the election, they will presume.
They have this weird presumption rule. So your ballot, if you mail it in, has to be postmarked by election day. They have made this presumption that the state Board of Elections is operating under, that if there is no postmark on your ballot when it shows up, that they will count it and presume that it was mailed beforehand. And to me,
but then they took it to the courts,
and the court upheld it. And I was just and look,
No, actually, the courts said we're going to continue counting until Friday.
Yeah,
we're going to continue counting on Friday. So in other words, a court in Pennsylvania, the highest court, chose to overturn an act of the legislature.
Yeah,
and make their own law by saying, oh, no, the election doesn't end election day at 8 p.m. No, it doesn't. The election continues until Friday.
If this election comes down to Pennsylvania and there will be court challenges about that, it is going to make Bush v. Gore 2000 look like amateur hour.
Because it's going to the Supreme Court.
It is going to be so much more contentious.
Absolutely. It's going to the Supreme Court.
It is going to be crazy.
And Judge Amy Coney Barrett might actually have to vote on
weigh
this.
in, which is going to be very interesting because a lot of people are, if it turns out that Trump wins and ACB has to write an opinion or votes a certain way to give, I put this in air quotes, but it's not giving. It's just, they're examining a legal issue and deciding. A lot of angry Democrats are going to be like, Trump rushed her to the court to hand him the election, and all this claims of illegitimacy. It is the last 2 months have not boded well for making this a very relaxed outcome.
Is this mic okay? Just checking. Okay, good.
All right,
as long as you can hear
good.
it.
As everybody
I just want to make sure. So, podcast listeners, please weigh in on Facebook. Tell us how many electoral votes Donald Trump is going to get tonight, or in total, whenever we find out. And that we want your guess. And we also want you to tell us how many electoral votes Joe Biden is going to get. We want your guess on that as well. We're pretty certain you think Donald Trump is going to win, but we want to know, what's your guess? What's your guesstimate? I think that's kind of interesting. It'd be nice to know. So, Ohio, we're waiting for Ohio, and obviously, because that's going to come in, we're waiting for Georgia, and we're waiting for that all-important Senate race in South Carolina, where the Democrats have spent how much?
Which one?
In South Carolina. With
South Carolina, it is the most expensive Senate race in history, with about $120 million spent there.
In South Carolina?
In South Carolina.
And why?
Why?
Why have the Democrats spent $120
to go after Lindsey Graham.
And why have they do it?
Because he is the powerful chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
And they're angry at his soliloquy that he made about Kavanaugh because Lindsey Graham laid into the Democrats
for how they've pretty much performed a lot of shenanigans when it comes to Republican appointments, and how it's always been Republicans who've always had their judicial nominees be scandalized in the worst ways. And it didn't start with Kavanaugh. In the 2000s, it was Miguel Estrada, because he was going to be a circuit judge and probably a Supreme Court justice from the Bush administration.
It all started out with
Bork before that. I mean, this is, Samuel Alito, was Dianne Feinstein called him a racist during his hearing. And there's videos of his wife who is sitting there in the stands watching her husband be brutalized for things that aren't true. And, Republicans, for the most part, we've played pretty fair when it comes to Supreme Court justices. I mean, RBG was confirmed after, she was the first judge confirmed after the Bork issue. And Republicans confirmed her 97-3. So, I mean, this is
how about Clarence Thomas? Look what they did to him.
Yeah.
I mean, they sent a big message to any black conservative. You better not be a Republican, at least not openly, like Clarence Thomas, because if you do, this is what's going to happen to you.
It's a shame, because he is one of the best legal minds, I think, to read. I mean, a lot, the way that he writes, as a newfound law aficionado here, I am 10 weeks into law school, so I'm basically a lawyer, ladies and gentlemen. I kid. But, as somebody who really reads a lot of decisions,
we have a lawyer light here.
Yeah. He is, if you're at home and you want to read somebody who's a very good conservative justice, just read, listen to, watch videos on Clarence Thomas. I mean, he really gets it.
And look who swore in Justice Amy Coney Barrett.
It
was Clarence Thomas. There was a message being sent there.
Yeah.
But the message wasn't being sent to the American people. It was being sent to the Chief Justice. Chief Justice Roberts. They were telling Chief Justice Roberts, you know what? This is who controls the court from this point forward.
Yes, you said it right. Who controls the court? Because basically, Clarence Thomas, it puts Roberts in a weird place, because Roberts is this person who has this sense that the legitimacy of the Supreme Court is always what's most important in his decisions. And you've seen him in the last couple of years shift from being a very solid R vote to a very solid D vote on a lot of controversial issues.
So true.
In a 6-3, or effectively with Roberts being a liberal 5-4 decision, who has to assign the decisions? And that'll be Clarence Thomas, because he's the senior most member on the Supreme Court. He's the oldest serving, and he was nominated in 90. I think he was nominated in 90. So he will effectively be giving out who writes the decisions. I mean, there will effectively be a conservative Chief Justice of the Supreme Court on 5-4 R block minus Roberts decisions. So
that's exactly right.
It is going to be an interesting SCOTUS term, to say the least, coming up. And
because look, Chief Justice Roberts, I've always thought there's something not quite right with him.
There were a lot of Republicans who were very skeptical about him when Bush nominated him.
When Obama won and Chief Justice Roberts, the first time Obama won the presidency, Chief Justice Roberts administered the oath of office to President Obama. There was a lot of creepy stuff that was going on too. There were all kinds of stories that they had to re-administer the oath later.
Yeah.
And apparently those stories had been verified, but never quite fully explained. There's something not right there. And I feel like the person who has kept the secrets, who has all the secrets, is Clarence Thomas. And the fact that he was there in the White House administering the oath to Amy Coney Barrett, that just made my day. Because it was the biggest you-know-what. So
interesting little tidbits here concerning Florida, which at this rate is pretty much all but called for Trump. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won
But
Miami.
they won't call it. They want to call it because the news won't call it. Why won't they call it?
They still
they want to keep you there.
They want to keep you engaged.
Because mathematically, I think they know.
Yeah, but they just in case I'm surprised. So in 2016, Hillary Clinton won Miami-Dade County by 30 points. Which Miami-Dade County is very liberal. Biden only won it by 9 this go around. I mean, that is a 21-point shift.
And I got to tell you something.
Miami-Dade County.
So Palm Beach County has always traditionally been a very liberal blue county. And this is anecdotal, of course, but I know people that have been there for the past 6 months. And they say that, so many people in Palm Beach County are pro-Trump people, and they're openly pro-Trump with signs in their yards in a really blue county.
And he doesn't need to win these counties, but I mean, historically, these are counties that the margins against a Republican were 30 points. If he puts that into 5 to 10, I mean, you make running up margins there makes it so much harder for Biden to like.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot of Republican governors in blue states have been able to operate well is that they kind of dampen the margins that these run in traditionally reliable Democratic areas, and then that's how they're able to take margins in very Republican places and have them count so much more.
I think what this also shows us in Florida, because you mentioned the counties in South Florida, which are traditionally very blue counties. What this tells us in Florida is absentee ballots and early voting in Florida did not necessarily go the way the Democrats thought it would.
No, and I think this has been a wake-up call for the Republican Party, and you saw it in that California special election that Republicans, if they try and invest in it, they can be very competitive in the early vote absentee ballot race. They just have to devote time and resources to it. And I think, no matter how much we fight it because we believe that, there's something special about voting on Election Day, that this is just an issue that we're going to have to contend with and actually compete in that space as well.
It is, because traditionally in most states, not all states obviously, traditionally in most states, in order to get a ballot for an absentee ballot, you had to actually request it.
Yeah.
This particular election cycle,
they just handed them out like candy.
I'm
in New Jersey. They didn't even ask me. They said, we're having like one polling location open, and here's an absentee ballot. Just fill that out. I was like, all right.
I had a bunch of ballots mailed to my house, as all of us did. And one was for my daughter, who doesn't live there. She lives in Virginia. But they mailed one for her anyway. So if I was crooked, hey, I could fill out her ballot, send it in. But of course, we did not do that.
I saw a lot of anecdotes on Twitter. People in D.C. had like states where they just automatically sent ballots out to everybody on the roll. There's people who were living in, a townhouse in D.C. and they got the last 7 residents absentee ballots in the mail. And they're like, this person hasn't lived here for 2 years. That guy hasn't lived here for 4. It's like, you see like problems like that a lot. And that's why I like that if we are going to do absentee
So this is not a good sign. So in North Carolina, Donald Trump is significantly behind, like 200,000 votes behind. It's almost like the opposite of Florida.
Yes.
And there's 73% of the vote in North Carolina, and Donald Trump's behind 200,000 votes.
If Trump can't get North Carolina, it's going to be a very short night for him.
It's going to be a very short night indeed, unless Donald Trump can pull in Michigan
or Wisconsin.
I think he'd have to pull in Michigan because I think North Carolina has how many electoral votes? I have to look that up.
15.
I think it's in the teens. So, and Michigan I know has 16 electoral votes. So then that would mean Donald Trump now would have to win Michigan and Pennsylvania in order to
he now
move
needs to
forward.
find a state in the Midwest to make up the difference.
And that would be really bad. Now, it appears that there are only like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like there are about 10 to 12 jurisdictions in North Carolina that haven't, counties that have not.
Yeah, so North Carolina has 15. Trump would have to find another state. Now, we'll have to see, though. I think, again, that's a state where early voting was counted early and then sent out on immediate call.
And Donald Trump is ahead in Ohio, but only 55% of the vote is in. Oh, no, excuse me, he's behind in Ohio, but only 55% of the vote is in.
Again, early votes counted early. That's going to change a lot over the next couple of hours.
But North Carolina is concerning because it looks to me like there are only a dozen jurisdictions that have not reported, and he's behind by 200,000 votes. That's a lot of darn votes to make up.
That's a lot of margins. That's also
margin.
Concerning because if Trump goes down, the Senate is going to be...
He didn't spend that much time in North Carolina either. I mean, he did...
He outspent Biden in North Carolina, but in terms of rallies, I mean, he tried to get there, but it's hard when you had so many of these states that were very close. I mean, Trump had to significantly devote time and resources to so many different states.
Oh, yeah.
That it got hard to focus on one or two states. How, like in 2016, I mean, Trump spent the last, week of the election in the Rust Belt.
But here's the thing. We were talking about Virginia, right? Podcast listeners, about how Virginia has turned into a blue state, without question, because Virginia was the second state tonight that was called for Joe Biden. And the first state was Kentucky that was called, and that was called for Donald Trump. What I don't want to see happen, I don't want to see North Carolina become another Virginia where you have all these people from the Northeast moving to a state and then bringing their toxic politics with them and ruining the state.
Yep.
It's like, okay, well, New York isn't good anymore, so I'm going to move to North Carolina. Maryland isn't good anymore, so I'm going to move to North Carolina and take my politics with me. New Jersey isn't good anymore. I'm going to move to North Carolina and bring my politics with me.
My mom has this problem in Texas. You get so many. It is the most California. Sorry, I'm saying California. My dad lives. Texas is about to gain 3 electoral votes.
Huge.
Which means that a lot of people are moving there. That means a lot of people from out of state are moving there.
3 more congressional districts.
3 more congressional districts.
So other states are going to lose 3 congressional districts.
Yes.
Texas will gain.
Texas will gain. So why do they've had increasing population? Because people see Texas and they go, oh, great business environment, low property taxes, no income tax, it's great to live here. And they come in and they vote the same stupid policies that made them leave their home state in the first place.
Absolutely. And Georgia, it's, going to be a tough race too. It looks like that way tonight so far. So I'm particularly worried about Georgia and North Carolina, but I think at the moment we got to really be concerned about North Carolina. Yeah. This, by the way, is very reflective of 2016 when Donald Trump eked out Florida at the last minute with the panhandle, and then they went to North Carolina and it looked really razor close in North Carolina.
Yep.
Democrats want to flip North Carolina something awful, and they might succeed tonight. Thoughts?
North Carolina, yeah. I'm heading on Twitter right now because I wanted to take a look at what people are saying about North Carolina. I'll keep you updated on what I see.
And of course, Pennsylvania, the votes are coming in, which is good, finally. But, allegedly we're not going to know about Pennsylvania until Friday because they're still counting, by the way. They're still accepting ballots. You can still go to Pennsylvania and vote, by the way. So, But podcast listeners, please post on Facebook. Let us know. That's our biggest interactive capability of knowing what you're thinking. Please post on Facebook. Facebook, tell us how long you waited in line. Did you vote today? Did you vote early? And what you think the ultimate outcome is going to be of this election in terms of actual electoral college votes. How many Donald Trump will get and how many Joe Biden will get. That is really awesome. And maybe we can throw in a prize or something. I don't know. If you get it right, we'll invite you on the podcast. How about that? You have to fly to Annapolis, though, okay? Drive to Annapolis, fly to Annapolis. It's okay, but we'd love to have you. We'd love to have you because that means you know something if you guess this correctly, because I'm not going to guess this correctly, I can tell you. It's going to be too close. This is Arizona. Okay, so I don't think the Arizona polls are closed yet anyway, so that's 11 electoral votes for Arizona that we're talking about now, of course, on the news.
Democrats have been trying to turn Texas blue for several presidential cycles.
Yeah, this is a shocker right here.
Yeah, but it's only 56% of the votes in.
Only 56 in, but I would, if I was Trump, I would like to see that margin rung up a lot more.
But we should talk about suburban women, because apparently that is the issue. And
That is the demographic, yes.
I would tell you this, podcast listeners, as a candidate, when you go to doors and you knock on doors and a mom answers the door and there are children in the house, then women are a lot more discerning about who they vote for. They want to know about really key issues, not just the bread and butter issues, but they're incredibly interested in school safety and the safety of their communities.
And it's also how you present those issues, how you talk to them, because a lot of it is the person that they're receiving the information from. They're very big on character.
Well, one of the things Trump did during this election that was right is he would talk about, well, you don't want what's happening in the cities to move into the suburbs. And he talked about that, but I wish he would also have said, for all of you moms of the suburbs, do you really want your communities and your schools to be unsafe like they are in the cities? I don't want that for you, and that's why I'm working for you to make sure that we keep your community safe. And he kind of said it, but he doesn't, in the Trumpian way, doesn't articulate it that particularly well.
No.
And as a result, I think a lot of moms weren't listening to that. What they heard him say instead was, you don't want those cities in your communities.
New York called for Biden. Big shock, ladies and gentlemen. Right off the cuff there. Colorado, that's going to be an interesting Senate race to watch.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of Cory Gardner. I respect him a lot for how he approached the election as well as the priorities in the Senate. Like, it would have been easy for him, for electoral purposes, to mail in the election, the nomination, Amy Coney Barrett. But he stood by his principles, and I think he ought to be commended for that, no matter how this election turns out for him.
So look, they just called the Colorado Senate race.
That off the bat, yeah,
so
I saw
that
coming. Cory Gardner.
So the Republicans are now down one senator. They're down one senator.
Yes.
So
because if Trump goes down, because if Biden has all three branches, because the House is out of play, was never really in play either.
No, it wasn't in play. You're right.
Then
I agree.
There's a lot of damage. There's a lot more things that he can do.
But here's the one that I'm hoping for: is John James
is a rock star.
So 15% of the vote is in the state of Michigan. John James is currently ahead, and let me tell you something. He is a rock star. He is the senator that I want to see as a pickup for the Republican Party, because we are the Big Ten party, and I want more and more African Americans. Look, if 20% of African Americans start voting Republican, it's game over for the Democrat Party. It is. It's game over. Mm-hmm. But traditionally, that has not been the case. Republicans only get single digits for African Americans to vote for them. This president, I think, is going to do significantly better than that. But if he can bring in John James as United States Senator from the state of Michigan, some people say, and you've said this too, Garrick, that John James may actually pull Donald Trump up in Michigan.
Yes, so I think that John James will actually run a couple points ahead of him. Look at this. The Detroit local newspaper actually endorsed John James over Gary Peters, a newspaper that has endorsed every Democrat that's ever run there ever, basically, because newspapers are effectively they're reliably Democrat mouthpieces.
Of course,
and to see that was exciting, because it's like recognition that Republican minority voices matter too, and somebody like John James, who is just incredible to listen to, has great views on policy. He has a great history and story. He was an Air Force Black Hawk pilot, or an Army Black Hawk pilot, and then he's a small business owner. He made his millions off the American dream, and some voice like that in the Senate, and be able to open up the tent for the Republican Party to start making inroads in communities that we've traditionally been less than competitive in is going to be crucial for the long-term viability of the party.
And the other interesting thing to me is there is a race in Montana as well.
Steve Daines is up against the current governor, who is term limited out, Steve Bullock. And I think Daines will win that pretty handedly, but Bullock
get this, the Republican Party, because I know this because a friend of mine was dispatched to Montana 10 days ago, because the polls they were seeing in Montana were far too close for that particular senator.
Yeah.
And so the Republican Party actually is, and here's why. Because Californians are tired of California, and
So they go to
moving
Montana.
To Montana,
And
they're bringing their toxic politics. It's just like the Northeast moving to the southern states. The Northeasterners moving to the southern states. Now you got the Californians on the West Coast moving to Montana and messing up the politics.
Montana is a very fascinating state and how people view it too. So, it's a state that, like, while it will be a very reliable Republican presidential vote, down the ballot, it has one congressperson, 2 senators, and a governor. They like to split. They had a Democrat governor, a Republican congressperson, or Republican senator, and John Tester, a Democrat senator.
Who's a tool, by the way.
Yeah.
He's all in on Democrat policies, which I don't understand. It's like
a state that just enjoys, like, having this toed the line division. It's very strange.
Because John Tester, when you look at his voting record, he is reliably voting for the crazy stuff.
Yeah, he went against Trump on a lot of issues, but, like, they just, I don't know, Montana Republicans are like, oh, John Tester.
Matches.
Matches.
We must have matches, okay?
It preserves the flavor.
But the Montana thing is interesting to watch because of the fact that the Republican Party, as I said, a friend of mine was dispatched to Montana, and they're literally knocking on doors there. And I'm just like, how hard is that got to be to knock on doors in Montana, right? It's like, okay, you got another 10 miles to get to the next door.
All right. The next house is 10 miles on the left.
Right. Wait a minute, watch out for the grizzly,
Yeah, you really are out in the middle of nowhere there. It is big sky country for a reason.
You need to knock on doors with a shotgun, I mean, not because of the people that answer the door, because of the animals that might attack you on the way.
Yeah, but so Montana's an interesting one because I am firmly under the belief that we may have a 50-50 Senate when things are all said and done, and that is going to make it for a very...
Is that your call, 50-50?
I think 50-50. It's going to make for a very interesting time.
Not if John James wins, and of course we're going to flip Alabama.
That's what I'm saying. So we get the +1 there, which is what I've already taken into account when I say 50-50. So the Democrats have to pick up a seat somewhere, and the Republicans have to pick up a seat somewhere. Republicans are very optimistic about John James because, like we said, he is probably going to run ahead of Trump on the ballot, and he's a very popular, has great favorability ratings. But there's that Democratic, entrenched establishment there that he's going against.
Tom Tillis in North Carolina. At the moment, I got to tell you, podcast listeners, North Carolina is not looking that good.
Not looking that
for
good.
Tom Tillis or for the president of the United States.
Tom Tillis did not run a good campaign.
He's run a really terrible campaign.
Run a terrible campaign.
And he just looks tired anyway. And I know that he had coronavirus. That didn't help.
He just, and all the breaks you thought should have fallen Tillis's way, he just never took advantage of them. I mean, Cal Cunningham, had that extramarital affair scandal that came up out of left field.
Yeah, which, by the way, he is an officer. He's in the military,
and
he should be court-martialed because you're not allowed to do that.
They're investigating him for it. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, but he could get elected. You could have a court-martialed officer get elected to the United States Senate.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously he hasn't been court-martialed yet, but they could do so.
Yeah.
Even after
they could reprimand him for it. Yep.
It just shows you the kinds of people that are moving into North Carolina from the Northeast because.
Still early, 16% in, but Trump has a nice lead in Michigan. Not a lot of precincts reporting. 16%. Not a lot of the precincts are in yet. Though it does look like, I think that is Detroit that is
Detroit. Two Detroit counties have reported.
Mm-hmm. Or are currently reporting. Yeah.
Or reporting, yeah, good point. Look, it's my hope that Donald Trump wins that state, the state of Michigan. I know I keep saying
because it makes things a lot easier.
It makes things easier, but also it opens the door for John James to win. And if he wins, John James, the Republicans, I think, are going to control the Senate. It might be 51-49, but controlling the Senate is a lot better than the alternative of losing the Senate and also losing the presidency. At least there's a check and balance on a Biden presidency, which I dare say I obviously don't want, but at least that would help.
It would help. Here's the thing, though. If it does become like a 51-50 Senate or a 50-50 Senate, if I'm the Republicans and I am Joe Manchin of West Virginia, there is a very interesting argument to be made that Republicans should pull out a lot of stops to court him to flip because he is a Democrat in super pro-Trump West Virginia, but also loves Manchin because, for intents and purposes, he's a Republican Democrat.
Absolutely.
And he's affiliated Democrat. He won his re-election campaign by 15 points.
But you know what? Joe Manchin in West Virginia, he's a Democrat, but at the end of the day,
he votes Republican.
He's still, but on the key issues like Obamacare and other issues,
big healthcare guy,
he's all in with the Democrat Party, and so I gotta wonder how reliable he is, because as long as he
I know he's reliable, but I'm saying, like,
if he caucuses with the Democrats, you're a Democrat.
Jim Justice that's what I'm saying. Like, Jim Justice was a Democrat governor of West Virginia, and Republicans were like, "You're a Republican," and got him to flip his party registration. It'd be interesting to see if they can make a play like that. Now, I know he's been hesitant to it, and he said, "No, I could never." But
when Manchin is up next time, he's not getting back in. I'm convinced of that. And obviously, this is a tough map anyway this year, because there are more Republicans up for re-election in the United States Senate by far than there are Democrats. So it's much harder for the Republicans to hold on to the Senate. But as I said, John James flipped that in. And by the way, what would be the icing on the cake tonight? Is if we flip Minnesota.
Yeah.
Because it would be the first time the state of Minnesota had flipped to Republican control.
Less than 1%. Yeah, less than 1%. Trump up in Wisconsin, ladies and gentlemen. Alabama for Trump. Not a surprise there. Aside from West Virginia, that's about as Republican as it gets. Arkansas also called.
Yeah, 58% for Donald Trump in Arkansas.
Yes.
You'd think it'd be in the 60s, though, when you think about it.
Yeah.
But it is Arkansas.
It is, I think, in
it's
this
Bill Clinton's home.
It is hard being an incumbent, I think, these days, because I think
everybody is anti-incumbent.
Everybody's now, everything's very anti-incumbent these days. No matter what side of the party, what party is in power, the opposition party has done fairly well. I mean, look at the Obama administration. He may have won, both of his presidential elections, but I mean, after 2008, everything was easily Republican.
And I tell you something interesting is with Steny Hoyer is the House Majority Whip
from Maryland.
He's from Maryland. He's my congressman, but I don't like him. He's really not my congressman. But Steny was at a very conservative district in Maryland today, shaking hands. And first of all, that's smart, right? Because you want to go after the areas where you think you are the weakest, and the election day you do at least. But Steny was there nonetheless, and he's, I think, 81 years old, and he's been in elective office for 50 years of his life, whether it be the state legislature, United States Congress. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
By then,
of the octogenarians. So Nancy Pelosi's 80, Steny Hoyer, majority leader, 81. Mitch McConnell is 78. If Biden's elected, he's going to be 78. He'll be 79 when he's inaugurated. I mean, can we get some youth, ladies and gentlemen?
That's right. We need the youths.
I mean,
we need some youths.
God, you don't even got to be youth like 30, because people who are 30, I don't think should be running the country.
Oh, surprise, podcast listeners! Massachusetts goes for Joe Biden. Oh, the People's Republic of Massachusetts.
The People's Republic of Massachusetts.
And right now, they're only 16% in. 16% of the vote is in Michigan, and Donald Trump is ahead. So there's a long way to go in Michigan. But believe me, my fingers are crossed, because Michigan is, in my opinion.
I know it's still early in Texas, but if you got to look, there's still a lot of counties and precincts that haven't started reporting yet. So don't get. My mom's texting me. She's freaking out. Mom, if you're listening, and if you're a passionate watcher who's like thinks that Texas is going to flip and the world's going to burn, relax. It is still early. I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Never mind.
But Biden is still ahead in the state of Texas.
Still 60%, but I mean, looks like half the precincts haven't even reported yet.
More than that. Looks like a good. You're right. More than half of the precincts and the counties have not yet been reported in the state of Texas. So that is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, the cities, it looks like for the most part have started. I mean, that's Dallas in the Northeast, Austin, San Antonio. So, the border is going to come in. It's going to be very interesting. But I think at the end of the day, Trump should win Texas by 3 points.
And it's funny because in my county, podcast listeners, my county is Calvert County, Maryland, right? There was just a tweet out by the Washington Post, all right? The Washington Compost says, Calvert County is experiencing a 2-hour-long wait at one of its polling places. The state will not release any results until all voters have cast the ballots. That's Calvert County. That's my county. And I want to tell you why. Because the state told the counties you could only have a limited number of places to vote on election day. And in Calvert County, which is a Republican county, okay, it's not an overwhelming Republican county, but it's a Republican county. Those Republicans wanted to wait until election day to vote.
And they only had 4 places to do it.
And the state of Maryland won't release its election results until the county that I live in. basically has everybody who's still in line, and they're still in line 2 hours, right? It is now 9:15. That means in Maryland, 11:15, we won't have all the actual votes in from my county, a Republican county, which is really kind of interesting. It shows you what a big fail this pandemic has been with limiting in-person voting.
Yep.
Because there are plenty of places in this country where people prefer to vote in person, and
It made it so much harder for them.
they made it harder. That's harder for Republicans. It's not
Karl
harder for
Rove.
Democrats.
We are currently watching Karl Rove on screen.
Yeah,
everybody's
Karl Rove.
favorite Bush
Yeah.
confidant.
He's a bushy.
He's
How
a
we doing,
Bushy.
Chris? Oh, yeah. So we're doing good, podcast listeners. Please go on Facebook and tell us what the Electoral College count is going to be at the end of the day for Donald Trump, and what the Electoral College count is going to be for Joe Biden. And YouTube.
Yes.
Do it on YouTube as well. So here's why. It's Mark of the Millennials, of course. Please tell us, because if you are correct, we're going to bring you on the podcast. That's a promise. You have to come to Annapolis, of course, because that's where we broadcast from. But if you are correct, we're going to bring you on. We promise. It'll be really interesting. So do it on YouTube. Tell us how many Electoral College votes Donald Trump's going to get on YouTube or on Facebook, and how many Joe Biden is going to get on YouTube and Facebook on Mark of the Millennials. And we will reward you. You will be on our podcast. That means because you are an oracle. You're an oracle. You are going to tell us. You must know something, because we have no idea. And at the moment, we're really nervous about North Carolina and Georgia. So, I mean, I think Georgia, I have a good feeling about Georgia that we're going to be okay, but North Carolina, I'm particularly concerned about.
Very concerning right now.
Behind
Yes.
by 200,000 votes. Donald Trump is behind by 200,000 votes. And now in Florida, they have 91% of the votes in, and Donald Trump is ahead by 350,000 votes now, approximately. So that's a lot of votes for Joe Biden to make up. Still looks to me like, and I'm sure you agree, that the next thing we have to really be concerned about is, just like in 2016, North Carolina.
North Carolina, yeah. I mean,
That was a
that's-
squeaker in 2016.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Warner, who was the
Senator from Virginia.
Sorry, Richard Burr from North Carolina, the senator, was saying he was up for in 16, and he only won
Excuse me,
by
sorry.
0.8 back then.
Yep, exactly.
And yeah,
So, of course, Virginia. We talked about Virginia.
Democrats
Virginia's
retain House control, ladies and gentlemen. Saw that coming.
Yeah. What a surprise.
Saw that coming 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's because the tech giants, ladies and gentlemen, podcast listeners, the tech giants gave so much money to the Democrat Party for United States congressmen running for office and United States senators running for office, because the tech giants don't want regulation. They don't want any regulation, and the Democrats are not going to regulate them. And by regulate them, I mean basically take away their most favored nation status, that they're not no longer private organizations. They're utilities. I think they're utilities. And I think when you post something on social media, it should be allowed for everyone to see. It should be treated the same no matter what it is, including speech that you might find offensive. And by the way, the nice thing about social media is, if you find it offensive, don't follow it anymore. You don't have to follow it. You can block that site. You can block that individual. But no, instead, the social media companies are blocking the sites for you. That is not the way free speech operates. And of course, those tech giants, who are all based in California, they want to make sure that the Democrats retain control of the United States House at a minimum, which they now have, and they want control of the Senate, because they want for perpetuity to be in control of speech, or the speech police. So,
Shouting out somebody who's been on the Mark of the Millennials podcast that we've been interested to watch, because she has turned into a pretty national voice in her own right. Kim Klacik is running for Congress in one of Maryland's very gerrymandered districts.
She raised almost $7 million, Kim Klacik. All right.
Yes.
So 10 days ago, it was 6.4 million. It's probably closer to 7 million now that Kim Klacik ran, and she is a black Republican in the city of Baltimore, running against the former NAACP chief, Kwasi Mfume, and he was also a former United States congressman. By the way, Mfume is like 80 years old, and he got upset about a week ago because he's like, it's not fair. All this money's coming in from outside the district. Well, it's like, I mean, Democrats do that all the time.
Welcome to Republicans' world the last 2 years. I mean, my God, dude. But no results yet have come in for that part of the congressional district race because, like you said, Mark, Maryland still has a hold on their election results, but we'll keep you coming, and we'll keep you informed because
she's having a huge party, by the way. Kim Klacik.
Good for her. I don't think she's going to win.
Timonium.
I don't think she's going to win, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how much of a dent that she could put into that kind of a block, and to see, how competitive we can start to be in some of those races.
So Kim Klacik, let's talk about her a little bit more. So she was on our podcast at the beginning of this year when no one knew who she was. And she started producing in-house her own TV commercials where she was in a red dress walking through the ghetto, which, by the way, is consists of much of, certainly not all of, but much of the city of Baltimore. And so she's walking through the ghetto saying, this is what the Democrats have brought you.
Yeah.
I mean, is this really what you want? I mean, this is what 50 years of Democrat control have wrought. I mean, you should at least vote for me and try me out. And so what we're seeing now is she got all this money because Donald Trump stood behind her. The RNC got behind her. She raised all this money, and she's against Kwasi Mfume. And my hope is, no matter what the outcome is of her congressional race, my sincere hope is more Black Americans are going to start affiliating with the Republican Party and go, you know what? I really don't have anything to lose because I live in the ghetto and it's been a ghetto for 50 years. She's offering something different.
And here's the thing, and I want to take that message further. I think that Republicans should take the time to make that message further. It can't just necessarily always be, what do you have to lose? It has to be, what they're offering me is better.
So get this, podcast listeners, a good friend of mine from Florida, all right? He's a lobbyist. He lives in South Florida. Just confirmed that in Miami-Dade, Florida, all right? I want you to know this. Even the news channels don't have this. In Miami-Dade County, Florida, 2 Democrat United States Congress seats have flipped to red.
Yes.
2. 2. That's huge.
Democrat Shalala, I think, she is about to go down.
Thank you, Robert Gladwell, for giving us that information. 2, so let me say that again. In Miami-Dade County in Florida, a traditionally blue county, 2 Democrat Congress people have been thrown out and 2 Republican congressmen have been put in.
538 has shifted its forecast going into today. Nate Silver and crew had a 90 in 100 shot of Biden winning. They have moved it down to 60 in 100. So it is, as we all expected, matches. It is starting to move.
It is. We can only hope. But that's really fascinating because it's always what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast is, Virginia has flipped to blue and it's permanently blue for, I don't know, the foreseeable future. What we rarely see is when we have a blue area flip to red. And now we see that in Miami-Dade County in Florida. That is a big change. And I can only pray that we do the same thing in the state of Minnesota. Wouldn't that be great? Because then the Republicans are expanding the map. Because all we hear from the news is the Democrats are expanding the map to South Carolina and to Georgia and to North Carolina. And you know what? The Republicans are expanding the map now to South Florida. They're expanding the map to Minnesota. They're expanding the map to Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania.
One of those Democratic Congress people in Florida who is going down is Donna Shalala, who is a mainstay in national Democratic politics.
Yeah.
So that's a big loss for them.
Where'd she live? She was in South Florida?
South Florida,
So she was in Miami-Dade?
Yep.
Oh, she's a hack, man. Thank goodness she's gone. Go ahead.
That's all I got for us so far. I mean, we're hitting that 9:30 lull where things are still being sorted out. Things are,
and they still won't call Florida. You notice that? It's like we know what Florida's going to do, but we're not sure.
It is. They're keeping you at the edge of your seat, Mark. They got to keep you invested.
So 91% in Florida,
and he's up to a 4-point lead right now.
Yeah, that's huge.
3.5. I round up to 4. Math was never my strong suit as a kid.
But by now, you would think, podcast listeners, that North Carolina, the results would be starting to come in some of those remote counties that they were showing that had not reported yet. And so it'll be interesting. But kudos to, first of all, I also have to give kudos to my daughter. I'm not going to say her name, but my daughter works for a consulting company that is fabulous, and her consulting company worked for at least one of those Republicans who flipped a seat in Miami-Dade. And her consulting company also works for John James in Michigan. And her consulting company works for Kelly Loeffler in the state of
That's
Georgia.
going to be a very interesting Senate race because, selfishly, Doug Collins decided that he was going to throw his name into the ring and primary Kelly Loeffler, and has made that race so much.
So look at this. Look how close this is. So Cunningham in North Carolina has what looked like about
1.5 point lead.
Yeah, it's about 100,000 votes more. But I don't know how many the percentage of votes are in North Carolina. At least
I don't know where.
They keep hiding the ball.
So there it is. Trump has pretty much closed the gap in Ohio, Texas. He'll probably go ahead a little bit. Yeah. So they're talking about it right now. North Carolina is
finally
all eyes are on it.
Yeah, record early voting, but you know what? There's a takeaway from this particular election.
He is only down about 70,000 votes, so it is going to be very close, ladies and gentlemen.
And by the way,
very close.
And we also have to say this about North Carolina, that it is a bellwether for the United States to understand, and for the Republican Party to understand, that we have to pay attention to suburban women.
Going forward, it's going to be the Ohio of national elections.
Yes, it is. We have to do a better job communicating to suburban women. And look, obviously, I support Donald Trump.
That has been his
voted
biggest
for Donald
flaw.
Trump, but he does not appeal to suburban women.
No.
And I think they see a guy that's been married 3 times, and I think they just kind of get a little upset.
Some of the comments, it's like, I get what you're going for, but he
doesn't articulate.
No.
And all they had to do is say, look, I want to keep your children safe, not just from the pandemic. I want to keep your children safe also from the rioting.
And this is the thing that I think's bugged me a little bit. And you brought up the pandemic. Is I think that, granted how the media has portrayed it and all those things, that is a huge obstacle in it. But I think Trump has made a lot of self-inflicted wounds on the pandemic response and just how he's articulated his thoughts on it. Because, national crises have always been a great opportunity for presidents to kind of coalesce support, build popular support in the things that you're doing. And I just feel like there were so many ways that he could have utilized it from a national politics perspective that he didn't capitalize the way he should have.
And so while Garrett's talking, I'm communicating with one of our experts about North Carolina because he has his laptop open and he's looking county by county to see which counties haven't been reported and what the makeup is of those counties. Because the fact of the matter is that the news programs are not telling us that. They're kind of hiding the ball, which is interesting. But nonetheless, Donald Trump is still down quite a few votes.
70,000.
It's
not an insurmountable lead, but it's
to make up.
The margin that's on these EV precinct polling. It's going to have to be about 2-1 Republicans turnout.
Absolutely, but this would be a real surprise if we lost North Carolina, and we cannot do that. And it also reminds me a little bit of 2016 because North Carolina came in kind of late.
Yep.
And it was also relatively close.
Yep.
At least it seemed that way. So I'm not really sure. So there's Michigan. So Michigan, 18% of the votes are in, and
57
Trump is up. Minnesota, Trump is way down.
I think that's 2%.
But only 2%
that just
is
started.
in Minnesota.
That's like, the cities have just started reporting right there. So we'll keep an eye on that as that starts to roll.
By the way,
more.
Ilhan Omar in Minnesota, all kinds of reports in the news, and I'm talking about mainstream news as well, where Ilhan Omar was ballot harvesting, and she was paying people to ballot harvest, which is illegal.
Ballot harvesting is such a
in Minnesota.
She
was doing it in Minneapolis in particular, and because Minneapolis, and a lot of Americans don't know this, and I know our podcast listeners probably do, but if you don't, hear me out on this. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, there is an enormous Ethiopian, and we have Ilhan Omar, and she came to this country as an immigrant, a country that has given her everything, and she hates the country. All she talks about is how awful the country is, and it's like, you just wonder why someone would come to the United States of America when they hate the country, and then they run for office, and then they win, and they still hate the country. So I'm texting my friend now about North Carolina to find out what is going on, because we need a lot more intel on North Carolina.
Yeah.
So there's Georgia. 43% of the vote is in.
Trump's up pretty solid there.
Donald Trump is up pretty significantly by what appears to be about 300,000 votes.
We'll see how that condenses as the night goes on there.
Question mark. I texted him. What is going on? They still haven't called Florida. It's like, why haven't they called Florida? I mean, come on.
I don't know what surprise they're expecting there. That's going to close a 4%.
And also,
gap,
I know we talked about this a little bit before, but Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, it's like completely blacked out, the news media. Completely. It's like,
yeah, I actually haven't seen that one scroll. I'm quite interested to see.
No reporting in South Carolina.
South Carolina, Trump up 12 points, 14 points there right now, but only 29% in.
But the thing is that the citizens of South Carolina were tired of Lindsey Graham. That's what they were trying to say in a number of different reporting.
It's like Mitch McConnell. I mean, you may not like him, but he brings home the bacon. You know, I mean, you have the second most important senator because he's probably the chairman of the most important committee, in my opinion, in the Senate. So, you know, it's somebody you want to keep around. Like, you know, if you're in Kentucky, you know, you may not like Mitch McConnell. And believe me, the polling of his unfavorable ratings would say too. I mean, if you ask most Republicans too, they're like, yeah, I like Mitch McConnell because I think he does great work. But like, you know, average Republicans are like,
there are a lot of Republicans that don't like Mitch McConnell,
but he brings home the bacon.
But equally important is look what he's done on all the federal courts with Donald Trump
on
the Supreme Court. He has
incredible undertaking.
He delivered 300 federal judges so far. At least that's my understanding. Certainly by the end of the year, there'll be 300 federal judges and 3 Supreme Court justices. That's unheard of.
Yeah, I give Mitch McConnell a lot of credit. So, you know, Paul Ryan, I think, you know, pretty much blundered the whole early House and Senate response after Trump immediately run it. But then he bowed out, you know, elected not to rerun. But Mitch McConnell, I think, rose to the occasion. He said, you know, if I'm going to have a divided government, I'm going to do the things that I can control. And I mean, the undertaking he has done to basically restructure the courts conservatively, and especially swing courts. I mean, the Ninth Circuit has gone from arguably one of the most reliably liberal courts to a pretty moderate, you know, 50-50 court. That's incredibly important, especially when you think about how the legal system works and how a lot of people venue shop, you know, where they want to bring out these suits.
So my friend, who is an expert in electoral politics, tells me that North Carolina is looking good. There's a lack of data in Ohio, he said.
Only
he hates a lack of data in Ohio. We just need a little bit more results. He says, but North Carolina looks good based on what he's seeing in the counties that have not yet reported. So, and of course, the news media is not reporting it either, but he's behind his laptop now, and he's looking at it, and he called this for Donald Trump in 2016 on a county-by-county basis in Florida, in North Carolina, and in Pennsylvania, and in Michigan, and in Wisconsin. I mean, the guy is brilliant. So it does make me feel a little bit better, but certainly doesn't look good on the scoreboard right now on as far as North Carolina is concerned. Just saying.
No, God, no, yeah.
I mean, he's got to have North Carolina. And obviously, Trump is up by 0.1% at the moment in the state of Texas.
But again, that's another one that as polls are coming in, that lead is going to build up a little bit.
We can only help. Only hope, I should say. And of course, you know, there's the incredibly blue state of Maryland.
Only 2% in, but again, that's because they have the gag right now.
That's right. For people 2% in for Maryland, but they called it for Donald Trump. That's because my county is still voting. And by the way, they're not voting because of the fact that we're trying to cheat. They're voting because we had a limited number of places to vote in person, and Republicans vote in person.
This is going to be the Senate race to watch
here's
tonight,
Michigan.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Explain
John James. What do I see here? I mean, it's still early. You know, this is going to be a very close election, and if Tillis goes down, which it looks like he probably will, John James is the pickup that the Republicans need to keep the Senate firmly 51.
True.
Yeah.
True that. So, yeah, John James, as I said earlier, I have...
There it is, Texas. Trump has pulled ahead.
Yeah, so Trump has pulled ahead. He was ahead by 0.1%. He's now ahead by 0.3%.
That'll continue to keep going up as time goes on.
But only 64% of the vote is in Texas. But John James, go ahead. I want to hear this about John James.
I really like him.
He's a superstar. I think
he's a
like
superstar. I thought that him running in 2018 against Debbie Stabenow, although it was a fruitless endeavor, was very important in building up his profile across the state, nationally. I mean, so Gary Peters raised more money, but it was by like hundreds of thousands of dollars, the difference. So, you know, in Senate races.
Have you ever heard of Gary Peters before?
No, he's like the least. More people knew who John James was than knew who Gary Peters was, which is incredible. Here's another one. Graham will probably
who was running scared. You know he's running scared Graham was because he was on all over Fox News. He's like, please send money. Please send money.
It was so funny.
It was really pandering.
I am old enough to remember moderate John McCain friend Lindsey Graham. There was a lot of talk that he would get primaried this go around because of how, reliably moderate he was. But he did shift his positions a lot, and you will see him probably win pretty handedly.
So there's South Carolina. Only 29% of the vote is in. Donald Trump is ahead by what looks like a little over 100,000 votes, which is, obviously somewhat comforting. And
South Carolina won't be.
I don't think we're worried about South Carolina.
No, but it was that Senate race. I mean, the polling moved away from Harrison. The last couple of rounds had Graham up by anywhere from 4 to 8, but it was still wild to watch.
Yep. So
Collins and Gideon in Maine is going to be interesting.
Yes.
Collins is a three-term last elected Northeast Republican
senator. Yes.
She is a three-term incumbent. I mean, she won in 2014 with like 30%, like a 30% margin. And she's in a close election because the nature of the country.
With a newcomer, someone that like literally decided, I'm going to move into Maine because I think I can win the United States Senate. So her opponent moves into Maine, and next thing you know, she runs.
Well, her opponent's actually, that lady lost. She's running against Sarah Gideon, the Speaker of the House of Representatives in Maine. So that's going to be a hell of a race. It's a shame because I think despite everybody's like, she's very moderate, but what would you rather have? Would you rather have a moderate R in Maine, or would you rather have a Democrat in Maine? And
exactly. So podcast listeners, please post on YouTube and Facebook and let us know what you think the final count is going to be for the Electoral College for Donald Trump, and what you think the final count is going to be for the Electoral College for Joe Biden. And if you get it right, you will be invited onto our podcast. Yes, you will. But you have to come to Annapolis to do that, and I'm sure you will. We would love to have you. It would be great. Because good old Garrick here, he's in law school. He's off today. They gave him off today.
Very busy.
But he's in law school. He's going to be a lawyer. He's going to be an ambulance chaser.
God, I hope not.
Hi, I see you got into an accident. He hops out.
Have you
here's my car.
Have you considered representation?
That's right. Have you considered representation? Isn't that illegal, by the way?
I have no idea.
I don't think you can actually go to an accident and get out of your car and give them a card.
I don't think so.
I think that's probably considered unethical.
My frame.
But you would never do that.
No. I have zero desire to do, medical injury law. So. And
of course, podcast listeners, unfortunately, we are listening to Chris Wallace, whom I can't stand. He works so hard, Chris Wallace does, to try to present himself as he's so fair, he's so balanced. And then he was the moderator for the first debate between Biden and Trump, and he was anything but fair. All of the questioning was asymmetric. Donald Trump, isn't it true that you didn't do enough during the pandemic? It's like, what kind of question is that?
Yeah, a little leading.
First of all, you should ask the question, but it should be, Donald Trump, what did you do during the pandemic that made it better for the American people? Joe Biden, what would you do differently? And then to really press both of them, the first Donald Trump on what he did, and Joe Biden, what would you do differently? But with Joe Biden, what did he say? Well, he didn't do enough. I mean, I would do more masks. I would do more social distancing. No, the really only different thing Joe Biden would do is more lockdowns. And that's what the American people should know.
Oh, there he is, the man of the hour, ladies and gentlemen.
Mitch McConnell's on Fox News with his
wife, Elaine Chao, Transportation Secretary. Nobody here probably knows that, but, that's quite the political power couple there.
That was McConnell. Very quick, a little soundbite there. Thanks
right
for reelecting
to the point.
Me. But, Kentucky was the first state to be called, and Mitch was like, boom, he's in.
Yep.
So now, of course, what he's trying to get to know is he still going to be in charge of the United States Senate? But that was my big issue with Chris Wallace, because we're just talking about him, is why didn't he ask Joe Biden, what would you do differently? And all Biden said was, more masks, and he kind of alluded to a national mask mandate inside and outside. And he also said more social distancing, Joe Biden did. Well, guess what, folks? That's what we've been doing since the beginning of the pandemic. But what about what's left? You know what's left? What's left is national lockdowns, locking everybody down, closing all the businesses, running them out of business. That's what the Democrat Party wants to do. Sorry, we can't live this way. But good old Chris Wallace wouldn't press Joe Biden on this issue, even though Chris Wallace tried to make the pandemic and did so successfully during the debate as the moderator. He made that the single biggest issue in the debate. And yes, it's on people's minds and it's important, but he didn't spend time asking the Democrat candidate what he would do differently. And I hear this from friends who are Democrats, right? I ask them the same thing. What would you do differently? Well, Trump didn't do enough. Yeah, okay. But what would you do differently? Well, I mean, I would have shut down the economy sooner. Okay, so
yeah, okay.
Guess what's happening? We have cases rising across the country. And are you going to shut down the country again? And if you shut down the country again, what about drug use and depression and suicide and loss of businesses and loss of property and foreclosures that are going to soar? You tell me which is worse. And I'm not sure. Obviously, Chris Wallace didn't do that. What do you think about that first debate? Excuse me.
I don't think Trump did himself any favors, but yeah.
No, he didn't do a good job on the debate. But Chris Wallace made it daggone sure.
Yeah.
That Trump did a really.
I thought the woman who did the second moderation was a lot better because she let them speak. You know, she was just like, you know, I thought that Wallace spent too much time being like, I'm in charge of the debate, rather than just letting the debate flow the way it was supposed to go. You know, you're the president. He's the president of the United States. You know, he's the former vice president of the United States. They're there to argue. They're there to debate. You know, whatever comes out of it comes out of it. But you know, don't be a part of the debate. Just moderate the debate.
He was, without question. Chris Wallace was a part of that debate without question. I mean, he decided he was all in on the Democrat side, and all the questioning was asymmetric questioning. By the way, he didn't even ask barely about all the riots.
No.
And that was fresh on everybody's minds. Did Chris Wallace really press Joe Biden to say, will you basically say the rioting is bad and it should stop immediately? And by the way, Joe Biden, what would you do to stop the riots? What would you do to convince the really crummy mayors across America who allowed the riots? What would you do to convince them to stop them? Nothing, right?
So here's the thing, something I see on Twitter that I want to bring up that kind of perturbs me about some of the elitism that one party may have over the others. I keep seeing a lot of people being like, well, all the educated states are blue. And it's like, you know.
Oh, it's so annoying.
It bugs me because it's like
so
a
annoying.
College degree is like, look, I think if you have the opportunity to go to college and you want a degree and you want to do things with that degree, like that's your God-given right. But it doesn't.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
On whether you're more or less like intelligent than anybody else. Like suddenly, if you don't have a college degree, you're just somehow an idiot. Like some of the, like, but you know, if that was the case, you know, like, look, I may not like Mark Zuckerberg. That man doesn't actually have a college degree. I don't think he ever. I think he dropped out of Harvard. You know, Bill Gates dropped out of college. A lot of these people that are like big entrepreneurs, you know, big innovators, they don't necessarily go to college. It's not a bearing on whether you're smart or not. You know,
but Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates are big-time libs.
Like I said, they're libs. But like, you know, this idea that a college degree has any bearing on your intellectual capacity is one of the most obnoxious senses of elitism that Democrats like to talk about all the time.
But the inference is, when the media says that college-educated people are overwhelmingly going for Biden, is you must be really stupid if you vote for Donald Trump. It's really what they're saying.
Some states have flipped Virginia from a win to unsure.
What?
Yeah, I know they've called them. They're talking about it right now, but a couple of people I said say that it's.
Wait a minute. How can Trump be at 1.2 million and Biden be 977? Oh, because only 48% is in.
They looked at the initial margins and they're like, I can't see.
Well, they're looking at Northern Virginia. That's why, because Northern Virginia probably hasn't reported. They're probably holding their votes back. It's only 48% of the votes, so I suspect that's what it is. But they still called the race for Joe Biden in Virginia.
Yeah. So he just said the turkey's not done in Virginia. He needs to see more before he calls it.
Interesting. And he's on the election team, by the way.
Yeah, he's a smart guy. He basically
What's his name again?
I don't remember his name, but he runs the decision desk at Fox.
Yeah, he runs the decision desk.
Like, you know, for as much as, you know, liberals want to rag on Fox, they are willing to admit that Fox actually does have one of the best decision desk teams in terms of analyzing polling and balloting and things like that.
I can only wonder what they're saying at good old MSNBC and CNN. You know, they're probably going, well, there's still time to vote in Florida. Go quickly. And by the way, register in Michigan and vote.
95% probability in Florida. That's about as good as it can be. You know, just call it already, please.
It would be nice if they called Florida. I agree, because that would be like 1 down. Now we need to know North Carolina. But as I said, my friend, who is an expert on the mapping and the county by county issues in Florida and North Carolina and in Pennsylvania and Michigan, by the way, he successfully called North Carolina last time.
At 7 p.m., Trump was in betting odds. Trump was plus 190 to win the election at the 7 p.m. betting hour. Currently, he is the favorite at minus 200.
According to who?
According to most of the betting lines.
That's funny. That's really funny. So there we go. We go Ohio. 71% of the votes are in Ohio, and Donald Trump is exactly at 50%. Joe Biden at 48.7%.
That's looking good. He's going to pull ahead there. Oh, Ohio, I think, is
what a surprise. He's up in Oklahoma. He won Oklahoma.
I would never have expected that. Texas light.
Well, okay, so they're calling some of the races, the individual congressional races. Yeah. This is one of the most significant changes in the way we conduct elections in our lifetime. So I got to tell you, I am so happy that 2 blue seats in the House of Representatives were flipped in South Florida.
Yep.
Because, as you probably recall, just a couple of years ago, in California, they flipped how many seats? It was like 7 seats.
7 or 8. They flipped another 4 in New Jersey.
Red to blue because of ballot harvesting.
Yep.
Ballot harvesting, which is illegal, like in most states. But in California, it's
encouraged.
Okay. In California, we want you to go cheat and pick up people's ballots and fill them out, even when they don't want to fill them out.
Trump's up a full point in Texas now. Ohio, that's looking good. All our precincts are now reporting here.
But look how close Ohio is. He's still only up by what?
But he's still up, and that's all that matters.
Maybe 50,000?
I don't see that margin shrinking. I see it kind of opening up a little bit.
So here's North Carolina. 86% of the vote is in.
0.4%. This is going to be a nail biter all night, ladies and gentlemen.
58-60. So Trump is down 20,000 votes in the state of North Carolina.
For reference, when we started talking about this,
it looks like there are 3 counties left to report. Yikes.
But if you notice, though, when we started talking about this at 8 o'clock, it was – where did I have it?
So, yes. So North Carolina and Iowa is going to be reporting soon in minutes.
Iowa's a Senate race to watch. Joni Ernst seemed to have pulled away in the last couple of polls. Trump's up a couple of at least 8 or like anywhere from 4 to 8 there. That's lean Republican there. So
where is Tillis, though? I mean, they haven't shown the Tillis race yet in a while.
I would imagine that he is going to be running a little differently than Cory Booker, my lovely senator, is going to be cruising to re-election.
And by the way, Cory Booker, apparently Donald Trump sunk him in Colorado.
Here's my thing with Cory Booker.
Apparently Trump is phenomenally unpopular in Colorado.
Trump unpopular in Colorado?
Colorado's a mystery to me anyway. I feel
that's
like
another
one dazed and confused anyway.
That's another one that's
it's like,
but that's,
dude,
that's another one. Bush won it both times,
dude.
And then they legalized marijuana, and a lot of people were like, "That's the place to be."
Mm-hmm. I know people that moved to Colorado just for that reason.
Yep,
because it was the first state, that was totally recreational and free and do what you want. And they moved there in Rocky Mountain High and really thin air when you go up in the mountains. So I guess when you smoke, it makes you feel even higher, I suppose. I'm not really sure. Good old John Denver country. But I got to tell you, podcast listeners, Michigan, for whatever reason, my heart's in Michigan because I want to see John James win, and I want to see Donald Trump win Michigan, because hopefully if Donald Trump wins North Carolina, it's game over, except for Arizona, right?
Yep.
I mean, you got to wait for Arizona.
Here's the thing.
Excuse me.
When it comes to Arizona, look at North Carolina.
Can I get up and get a Coke? No, I can walk with it. Yeah, go ahead, talk.
Anyways, so goes North Carolina. I think so goes Arizona. I think Arizona will run a point or two ahead of North Carolina for Trump. So if Trump wins North Carolina, I think he'll be pretty well off in Arizona. So I'm going to be watching that all night. Actually, I do need a bottle of water.
I get stuck with a
Nicotine
Coke.
gets me thirsty.
He'll bring more Cokes if you want it.
Nah, I'm okay.
So I got to tell you, podcast listeners, please post on YouTube and Facebook and tell us who you think's going to get the most electoral votes. obviously, but specifically tell us how many electoral votes Donald Trump's going to get and how many electoral votes Joe Biden's going to get. If you get it right and you post it on Facebook or you post it on YouTube, you will be on the podcast because we need you because Garrick's in law school. So, he's got to study, apparently. Study. He's studying through Zoom, right? He's taking Zoom classes.
Yes,
He's yet to see his professor in person.
I have the worst commute, man. I gotta get out of bed and walk.
So Ohio is 100% in. 52.
No, sorry, that was 2016 results.
Oh, 2016. God, why did they do this to us?
Threw you off.
So Donald Trump won in 2016 in Ohio by 52.1%. That's what he won when he beat Hillary Clinton.
This is Cincinnati, Hamilton County. This is Columbus, Franklin County. This is County Vote with Cleveland, Ohio.
I went to the Cleveland RNC convention in 2016. I was there when Donald Trump accepted the nomination. So I was there in that huge facility in downtown Cleveland. And I got to tell you, one of my takeaways, and it was really a great thing to see, is as a Marylander, where the state is very blue, it was so cool to go to a state where they have a really strong Republican Party that's very traditional and they're just hardworking people who really get out the vote and want to maintain their state as a Republican state. It's really cool. It's a really cool thing to see because they had thousands of volunteers at the RNC convention. They weren't paid. And most of them were people in their 50s and 60s and 70s who were there at the convention, and they were telling you which way to go, and they're passing out programs and so forth. It's really, when you're from a state like his, which is Jersey, New Jersey, or mine, which is Maryland, you forget it's a big country, and there are a lot of places that think the way that you think, because when you go back home to your state, you're like, what's happened? Who are these people, right?
It's almost a tale of two countries, deep blue seated, coasts, and then very conservative middle America.
Exactly. It's Chris Starwall. That's it. That's his name. It's Chris Starwall. And he's part of the Fox Decision Desk. And looks like we're getting some activity. Yep, here. Yep. We have any guesses yet? Come on, podcast listeners. Get on Facebook and YouTube and tell us.
Trump down 10,000 votes.
Tell us what you think.
In North Carolina.
Tell us how many electoral college votes Donald Trump is going to get on Facebook and how many Joe Biden's going to get. You can do it on Facebook or on YouTube on the Mark and Millennials channel.
And if you need a map to figure it out, what states turned into what electoral votes, go to 270towin.com and you can fill out a map right there and play with it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing it all week. It's been a lot of fun.
And if you get it right, you're going to be on the podcast. We're going to invite you to Annapolis to be on this podcast. We would love to have you on this podcast because obviously you will be, and you are an oracle if you guess it right. For me, I'm not going to guess because right now, North Carolina, even with my good friend saying that North Carolina looks good for Trump, Trump is still behind by 70,000 votes. No, 20,000 votes. Excuse me, my bad. Trump's behind by 20,000 votes.
10,000 in North Carolina.
And the other issue is that I think there are only 3 jurisdictions left in North Carolina that have not reported their results. And that's kind of a scary thing. So there's Pennsylvania, only 19% in, but they're still going to be counting in Pennsylvania.
Texas, Trump is opening up his lead there. He's up 2 points now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'll end somewhere anywhere between 5 to 6. It'll definitely not be like 18, where Beto and Cruz were within like 2 to 3 points of each other.
You know what I don't understand is how is it possible for a state like Texas, at least at the moment, to even be close when good old Joe Biden said he wants to get rid of the oil industry and he wants to get rid of fossil fuels and he wants to put all these people out of business.
It's another one of those states where it's a tale of two states. I mean, you go to Dallas, you go to Austin, San Antonio, Houston, the border areas. It's super democratic, like super liberal. They couldn't care any less about oil and all of the energy industry. But then you go to the rest of the state, the suburbs and the rural areas, and it's so conservative, so Republican. It's just incredible. All right, finally, a call for South Carolina. They should be following that up with Lindsey Graham real soon.
Good old South Carolina has been called for Donald Trump. Not even close. We can only hope that.
Oh,
There we go, Lindsey Graham not only wins,
$120 million
but he
down
wins
the drain
big.
right there.
So tell the podcast listeners what the difference is in votes and the percentage now. Right now, Lindsey Graham has
up
55%.
12% of the vote, and there is no way for Harrison to get there.
And how much money did they spend to unseat him?
Dems spent $120 million on that race.
Can you imagine running in a race and your opponent gets $120 million from outside the state? $120 million, and they try to unseat you. I mean, yeah, of course it's a lot of money. It's insane.
You know, now that Dems have the fundraising advantage, you suddenly stop hearing calls for campaign finance reform and to end Citizens United.
It's right. Now that they have the tech billionaires solidly on their side.
Now that Michael Bloomberg decided that in his spare time he's just going to run around shoveling millions of dollars in the States.
Donald Trump, I want him to win just to shove it up Michael Bloomberg's, you know what? Because Michael Bloomberg, what a tool.
Joe Biden basically pulled all of his ad spending in Florida like 2 weeks before the election because Mike Bloomberg showed up and said, I'll spend $15-20 million here. I don't care. I mean, you want to know why Virginia, the House races, it's like the state House, and we talk about it a lot in some of the bills, like dumbest bill segments on our podcast. Some of the reasons that, you know, that state legislature flipped was because Bloomberg poured in $100 million into Virginia's state elections. I mean, there was candidates in the state house there that had tens of millions of dollars to spend in, you know, elections representing 30,000 people. And it's like, it's just incredible how well they've been able to finance because of some of these billionaires. I mean, for all the talk about how the Koch brothers are these just evil Republicans, like when you look at how much money they actually spend relative to people like, you know, Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg, what the heck's his name?
He couldn't buy the Democrat primary.
No.
And so then he said, okay, well, I'm going to now try to just buy the general election.
Yep.
And you know, one of the great things about this country is that we are seeing in South Carolina in real time that you can't buy an election. You can't buy people's votes. You can't buy the American people because you actually have to have some sort of plan. You actually have to actually understand what's in people's heads and how they think. And if you're part of an organization that is anti-Constitution, you're not going to win in South Carolina.
No.
You're not. You're just not. And what's cool is South Carolina has a black Republican senator.
I just saw a tweet. Jake Tapper over at CNN has said on air, a Biden blowout was always a pipe dream. Yeah, suddenly, the pundits are less sure about what they thought was going to happen 8 hours ago.
Jake Tapper, what about all of those polls that showed Joe Biden ahead nationally by 15 points? Until 2 weeks ago, and then even then 2 weeks ago, it's like, no, he's still up by 8. We have nothing to worry about. He's up by 8.
I'm not as much a poll skeptic. Like I don't look at polls as like an absolute answer to how elections are going, but I find them very interesting in terms of getting a barometer on how a race is going. It's like I'm not like a huge poll skeptic, but you can't take them as this penultimate indication of how your race is going to go. Like you actually have to show up because typically Republicans outperform the polls from 3 to 4% of what they're predicted to be at. So, you know.
But there's also another issue, too, which is with polling, the way you poll is you call people, right? And
nowadays, who the hell's answering the phone?
That's it. You used to call people on their landline, and people would answer the phone. Well, now
they're doing text messages. You get a call on
your cell phone, and you see a number that you don't recognize, you don't pick up your cell phone and answer it. You don't.
Yep.
And if they leave a message saying, hey, we're a pollster, would you call us back? You're not going to call them back.
No, and like now
they're not going to.
And now they start doing text polls, online polls. Who's more likely to do that? You know, look, the Republican base is a little bit older than the Democratic base. You know, reliable to see make up power.
But the Republican base is also very shy about telling people how they're going to vote because they feel like that, and they're correct about this, that vote belongs to you.
I will never tell you who I voted for. You can all infer based on the podcast, but I won't tell you who I voted for explicitly.
I will.
Mark will. But you know,
I will.
Mark's an elected representative. So
and the reason I will is because one party is for socialism and Marxism, and one party is for a constitution. To me, it was really easy, this particular election, and I would also say, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Donald Trump says things that are very, I don't know, not very politic, and he's crude and so forth. But I heard the other day a great quote from someone. They said, Donald Trump was probably not made to be president for almost all times, but he is made to be president for this time. And I do believe that.
Ooh, Montana's closing. This is that we were talking about this
Yeah,
earlier.
so
This will be a
Montana
lot
look
of
like?
fun to see. It closed. I don't think there's any reports yet, but
So Montana is closed all 3 electoral votes. That means they have 1 congressman
all
and 2
three,
senators.
all 3, but a very pivotal Senate race going on up
It
there.
is.
I am a
And
big fan of Steve
Look how
Daines.
massive that state is. Imagine that you only have 1 congressman.
That means they have 700,000 people in that
They have
state.
700,000
And look
people.
at how big that state is now. Look,
It's massive.
I know the Mercator
Massive.
projection is slightly skewed, but it looks about as big as California in
Hmm.
terms of total land mass. But it is, this is
I
why
could see myself being in Montana knocking on doors and going to the next door. They're like, dude, I'm in Canada now. I can't vote in Montana because, you're just so far north. Well, I didn't realize I crossed the border. I mean, it's not like,
it's not like you market out here in the middle of nowhere.
That's right. There were no signs. I mean,
Trump up 3 points in Ohio now with 75% reporting.
Thank goodness.
Following that's probably going to open up a little bit more. Here it is again. Trump only 87%. Trump is down 10,000 votes in North Carolina. Trump up in Georgia. Ooh, okay.
so what is trending on Twitter? Let's look at
That's
that.
my favorite.
Let's find out what's trending on Twitter. Because, there are a disproportionate number of libs and progressives on Twitter. So I can only imagine what they're saying. Here we go. MSNBC, real-time election results and analysis. Yeah, we know that. Let me see. Election night. Well, that's pretty boring.
My trending. No
Yeah,
surprise.
Biden. Okay, what a surprise.
Mitch McConnell is currently the number 1 trending on my feed.
Interesting.
But
All
I think
eyes
they're
on
all
GA.
talking about how Amy McGrath. There's another person they wasted $100 million on to get within 12 points of Mitch McConnell.
Right, and the lady they had running against him just seemed angry. The lady running against Mitch McConnell.
Ballots
She just seemed
unharmed,
upset.
but election results in Fulton County, Georgia, delayed as pipe bursts in room with ballots.
Oh, no.
That's
No,
so
say that
comical.
again.
There is a pipe burst in the room hosting the ballots in Georgia,
Fulton
County, Georgia.
How convenient.
It's just comical sometimes.
You might want to dispatch the state police there in
So
Fulton
Texas is interesting, and why
Just
I
saying.
hope Trump continues to run up the margin there in Texas is, I will always say this, that the president and the federal elections are important, but there's nothing more important than your state and local election. And we're going into a new decade, and with that comes a new round of redistricting. Because the census is done and all the states are going to redraw their congressional district boundaries. And Texas is in a place where there's a couple of seats that could conceivably make that state house Democrat, which would make them able to redistrict in a way that is, more favorable to their political desires. And so, it's important.
So gerrymandering. If the Democrats were to get in control of the Texas legislature,
They would be able to
they could
put
gerrymander the heck out of the state, and there would be the end of any possibility that
especially in a
Republicans could take
state
back
that
the
is
House
going
of
to get
Representatives.
3 new districts,
Yes.
3 new Republican districts.
Yes. So that's why the Democrats are spending so much money in the state of Texas, because obviously it is the holy grail of the Republican Party, Texas and Florida,
Yep.
in electoral politics, but also in the United States Congress
Yep.
and the House of Representatives in particular,
You know-
where increasingly people are moving from states like California. California's probably going to lose 1 or 2.
They're losing 2.
California's going to lose 2 United States congressmen. And why? Because people are leaving California because of the stupid California exit tax.
I wonder what 2 Democrats get the chopping block on that one, where they're just like, all right.
Oh, yeah. The ones you hate the most, right?
Because Adam Schiff's district is really going to be on the chopping block.
I can only hope. And so podcast listeners, you have to follow this. So when you redistrict the state, it's the state legislature that redistricts the state.
But
In some
the
states, it's
congressional
independent
delegation
commissions.
kind of puts their thumb on the scale. A
They
little
do.
bit.
But the state
We all
legislature.
know in Maryland, Steny Hoyer draws the districts.
Yeah, that's a fact. So the state legislature redraws the districts. In most states, in some states, it's an independent commission. But when they do that, as Garrick said, the existing congressmen will put their finger on the scale and they'll try to make sure that their seat is safe And if you lose a congressional district because your state is losing
somebody's got to not be a
population,
congressperson anymore.
someone's not going to be there. And so usually it's the person they all don't like.
Or they try to draw out the opposing party. So you'll see it probably in California. I think there's 4 or 5 people in the delegation that are Republicans, or however many there are. They'll probably try to draw one of the Republicans out.
So podcast listeners, which state in the United States has the largest run-up in terms of percentage for Donald Trump? That's a question we don't know yet, actually, because not all the states are in.
Who's going to have the largest margin for Trump?
Who's going to have the largest margin for Donald Trump? Yep, that's the word.
I'm going to go.
And so please post that on Facebook or YouTube. Who do you think is going to have the largest? But you have to post it like in the next 20 minutes, because otherwise you're going to cheat and wait for the results to come in.
I won't give anybody any hints, but I have a very good guess.
I have a hint right now, and I think I know what it is. I think it's West Virginia.
I was going to say that's my guess too.
I was going to say West Virginia. Now that's in part because I just saw it on the TV, so I kind of cheated a little bit. But it doesn't mean that it is West Virginia. It could be, I don't know, Arkansas, Alabama,
Louisiana.
Oh,
South Dakota, that's a good pick right there.
South
North
Dakota.
Dakota, even, I would say.
That's pretty cool.
It's a good one.
So who said South Dakota?
Amy Kelly Williams.
Amy Kelly Williams. Thank you for doing that. South Dakota. Yes. It's actually really smart. By the way, is that where does Christine Nome?
She's North Dakota.
She's North Dakota. I think Christine Nome of North Dakota, I think she's a rock star. I think she's a future rock star in the Republican
Depending
Party.
on what happens, I think I can see her throwing her hat in the ring for 2024. There's a lot of very good female Republican governors out there. I mean, Nome in North Dakota, the governor of Nebraska, I think her name is Fisher.
Good name.
She's another good one.
I like that name. Hey, why?
You know, Nikki Haley was a great governor in South Carolina.
Nikki Haley was, yes, but I don't know. I think she's a never Trumper myself. I'd say
she got on the bus when it mattered.
You know, oh yeah, she did the whole put my finger in the air. Okay, everybody likes Trump, but now I don't like Trump.
Mark, let's be honest. A lot of establishment Republicans did that. They really they didn't see it coming. They were shocked when it happened. They didn't want it to happen, but it happened, and they were confronted with a conundrum: either be Mark Sanford and get primaried and screwed, or get on the team. And
Yes. So it's interesting. I heard something really interesting a couple of days ago about the establishment Republicans who are also anti-Trumpers. And here's what I heard, and I thought it was fascinating. They said, the establishment Republicans would have, and these were the talking head establishment Republicans, they would have cruises where you could go on the cruises and you could hear various lectures from the Heritage Foundation and from other think tanks about what it means to be a conservative and what conservatives should do when they get in control of the United States Congress, of the House and the Senate and the presidency. And they've been talking about this for decades. Yet, and by the way, guess what one of the things they said that Republicans should do when they finally get in control of the Congress and the presidency? They said, well, we should move the embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Well, here's the thing. Republicans have had this opportunity for decades.
Never did it.
And they never did it.
Democrats said they would do it and never did it.
I thought it was really interesting. So what they said was, well, why do we need these think tanks to tell us what presidents should do when they get in office, they never ever actually do it?
Trump is now up in North
Donald
Carolina. Trump has taken the lead in North Carolina.
By how many?
He is up by 30,000 votes.
So podcast listeners, Donald Trump's up by 30,000 votes in North Carolina. And my friend, who I told you was an expert in mapping, and I mean really an expert, he's behind his computer right now. He called it, but that race is way too close to call.
I had in my map, my week ahead map, I had Trump taking North Carolina. I know a lot of political.
And Tom Tillis is leading in the Senate race.
Thank God.
Tom Tillis is leading in the Senate race. A tool
very interesting.
Who cheated on his wife, Cunningham.
Do you know what we call whatever the hell his name is, Cunningham? We call him a Jody. Do you know if you know
what
a Jody? Do you know what a Jody?
A Jody?
You know what a Jody is?
I know what
Mark?
a Karen is. You educated me about what a Karen is.
So I'm going to let you in on a Jody.
Is that a Karen to put a guy?
It's a military thing.
Okay.
So the woman that
do you know what a Jody is?
The woman,
Mr. Bruce.
The woman that Cal Cunningham cheated on his wife with was married to an active duty soldier and who was away on deployment. And when that happens, you get the moniker Jody. So Cal Cunningham is a Jody.
Why Jody? Why was that name chosen?
That is
act?
older than me and older than you, Mark, and I couldn't begin to tell you why. But
so 90% of the vote is so now you know what a Jody is, podcast listeners.
I am here to
90%
let
of
you
the vote
know
is in
all
North
the
Carolina.
things you need to know.
And Donald Trump is ahead by 68, 70, looks like 30,000 votes. So 71. So now he's up. No, it's a lot closer now. Now he's only up by 30,000 votes.
Karl Rove has not aged gracefully. He just looks like a cue ball.
Yeah, he does.
I
look
can
like
put
a
him
cue
on
ball.
a pool table and just start.
Well, I don't think he
boxes.
exercises very often. I'm just
all that Texas barbecue.
I don't think he pushes away from the table that often.
Him and Dick Cheney get together for
and between his shirt and his tie, I mean, that's quite a mismatched arrangement there. You know, it's like checkered tie, checkered shirt. I mean, when I look at him, I feel like I'm looking at a psychedelic. You know, I'm not sure what.
Mark is a fashionista, ladies and
That's
gentlemen.
right, I'm a fashionista. Yeah, look at me. Do I look like a fashionista? So here's the thing. So Donald Trump is barely ahead, only 30,000 votes ahead in the state of North Carolina. I think 91% of the votes have been counted.
Yep.
So it's really way too close. Tom Tillis, the senator, has finally pulled ahead too. So what that means is that in the state of North Carolina, in the counties that are more rural, Donald Trump is so overperforming in those counties.
Yep.
So overperforming that they are, which by the way is unheard of, right? I mean, normally, I'll tell you this, in most counties in America, even when you have a supermajority, it's rare that it's 90-10 or 80-20. He must really be absolutely killing it in those rural counties in North Carolina at this particular point in time. And I can only hope that lead holds, of course, because he needs North Carolina if he is to have a pathway to victory, unless he wins, you know, Wisconsin and Michigan, as well as Pennsylvania. Go.
So, I don't know why I'm plugging it. I just find it fun. Millennial issues.
Good. Millennials. Right. Mark of the millennials.
Marijuana legalization. New Jersey will now join and be the 13th state, I believe, to legalize cannabis. Their ballot referendum, question 1, has overwhelmingly passed.
Where?
In New Jersey. They'll be the 13th state, I think, to legalize cannabis use for recreational policy. Yes. So
only 28% of the vote is in Pennsylvania, and Donald Trump is ahead by what looks like about 80,000 votes.
That'll be all over the place for the next couple of minutes until we start getting more stuff there.
Only 28% of the vote is in Pennsylvania, but clearly it looks like a couple of blue counties haven't reported, and a couple of plus not to
open
mention
seat House Congressional District 5. Okay. Some of these, I really am paying a lot of attention to the House races because I think that there's going to be an interesting conversation about which Congress people win, who flips what seats. You know, I'm expecting, obviously, the Democrats to keep the House, but I'm very interested to see, you know, where can Republicans make inroads, where can Democrats make inroads, because, you know, an election like this, I think, is going to shape national politics for the near future.
And so, look, podcast listeners, please post on Facebook and post on YouTube how many electoral votes Donald Trump will get and how many electoral votes Joe Biden will get. And if you correctly guess, you will be invited to be on our podcast. We will have you on the podcast because that means you know a lot about electoral politics or that you're really a good guesser. Doesn't matter. Either way, you will be on our podcast. Please post it on YouTube or Facebook for Mark and the Millennials. We would love to see what you think because at the moment, we have no idea because North Carolina is still very much in play. By the way, you know what they've been really silent on? Georgia. I mean, they talked about Georgia like an hour ago, it feels like. But
yeah, I think Trump's up by a
Georgia?
good margin there, but the results are trickling in.
Is that because of Fulton County?
Slowly there.
Tell us what happened in Fulton County, Georgia again.
So in Fulton County, Georgia, the pipes burst in the ballot room. Very odd.
Yeah. I feel like
I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but you know, sometimes things that happen aren't coincidence.
Yeah, you gotta wonder.
Trump up 6 points in Ohio currently.
Yep, and
Ohio, I think, is going to be a state that's going to be reliably Republican. I don't think it's going to be a swing state anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to, I think that Florida is going to start being reliably Republican.
And by the way, that's really great for Republicans because, as I said earlier,
They have a great
when I
governor
went-
there.
they
Mike
really
DeWine.
do. I like him a lot. And when I went to Cleveland, as I said earlier, for the RNC convention in 2016, because as you know, there was no RNC convention really that you could go to in 2020 because of the pandemic. It was all really virtual. But in 2016, the RNC convention, which was in Cleveland, was just spectacular because you saw how huge and how deep the Republican Party goes into the state of Ohio. I mean, because it is a massive state, and you have so many rural areas and urban areas, and you just have a real tradition of the Republican Party there, and a real Americana feeling when you go to the towns in Ohio.
Yeah.
And I know this because my son lived in Cleveland for a number of years, and it's just, I got to tell you something, it is really a great town. It's a great town.
It is one of those ones that's kind of on the come up. You know, everybody likes to dunk on Cleveland as being this abysmal,
I think Cleveland's a great town.
Lake Erie shithole, but
by the way, you want to go to Ohio City. Ohio City is in Cleveland, right? And in Ohio City, they have one of the largest concentration of microbreweries anywhere in the United States. And they traditionally brew the beer. The beer is spectacular. It's some of the best microbreweries
it's like
in the
my
United States.
favorite new
City.
fad.
It's a cool
the microbrewery thing. Like,
it's very millennial.
when I'm honestly, when it's the weekend and my girlfriend's like, Garrett, what do you want to do this weekend? I'm like, well, let's go to a brewery.
Yeah.
Because it's like all the best parts of a bar, but also so relaxing because you're sitting out in the country, but better. It's a bar, but better because 9 times out of 10, some jackass has an old reclaimed barn on their property and was like, I don't know, let's just start brewing beer here.
Let's do a brewery. Yeah.
And you're just sitting in a barn watching sports, drinking like IPAs, and it's the best time ever. That, I'll say, like, I like going to wineries too. I mean, it's just good times.
But in Ohio City, which is in Cleveland, they literally have like a dozen breweries, and one is better than the other. And you can take the tour. And I'm just serious. I'm serious that if you just go to one brewery and you take the tour, you can't take the rest of the tour and go to another brewery.
71%
you're like done for the day
of the ballots in Arizona. This is going to be a lot of early vote things.
Biden is up in Arizona at the moment.
We'll see how that changes.
And so, podcast listeners, you heard Garrick here talk about the whole millennial trend towards breweries and all that stuff. And by the way, microbreweries, and I like them too. But there's another millennial trend too, which I think is really kind of fascinating, and that is old fashions.
I like an old fashioned.
So now let me tell you why that's interesting to me and why I laugh a little bit. Is because in the 1980s, I was the bartender because I was in college. And whenever the waitress came to me and to order a drink for one of her tables or one of his tables, and they said, hey, I need an old fashioned. Immediately, I knew that the person sitting at the table was at least 75 years old, at least, because it was an old person's drink. And it's so interesting that fast forward, millennials, now if you're at a bar and you're a bartender and they say, I need an old fashioned, you're like, oh yeah, it's somebody who's under 30. I mean, it's really fascinating. You know how tastes change and all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
It's
I like an old fashioned. So why I started drinking old fashioned, I was
Manhattan's,
watching.
right. Manhattan's
are another
also
good one.
an old person's drink in the 1980s. Go ahead, sorry.
I was watching, like you said, old people, old fads. I was watching Mad Men, the series about the 1960s, the advertising agencies in New York.
We see Georgia. Sorry to interrupt before we go to Mad Men. So Trump is up in Georgia, but only 56% of the votes in. Obviously, Fulton County's not in, but go ahead.
No, but it was a big popular drink. It's what all the high rollers. And I had one. I was like, man, this stuff's tasty.
What's in it?
Hell if I know. I think it's bourbon, bitters, and Manhattan. Sorry, old fashioned is what I meant. Yeah.
Well, they crush cherries at the bottom.
Yeah, they do a crushed cherry
and then they
bitter.
put bitters in, and then it's bourbon.
And bourbon.
And then I think, and right, cherries in. All right. It's been a while.
Then I think an old fashioned sweet vermouth.
Podcast listeners, please put on
whiskeys.
Facebook and YouTube how you make these things. I have no idea.
I know. I'm 23.
He doesn't know either.
I drink
apparently.
real alcohol. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
That's right. He's a poor law school student. What'd you say, Chris?
My family drinks Manhattans for Christmas, and I know that Manhattans are whiskey, sweet vermouth, and bitters, and cherries.
So there you go. So
Yeah.
Chris Hopkins, by the way, our producer this evening. Thank you, Chris Hopkins.
I don't know about old fashioned.
I don't know. I just order things on the menu, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty tasty. Like,
So what we need to do is in the real immediate future this evening, we need to lock down Georgia and lock down North Carolina.
And
then
for
we
the
can
love of
start-
God, can we call Florida already? Marco Rubio tweets, can a network please explain to me how Joe Biden plans to overcome a 350,000 vote deficit in Florida?
Did he just tweet that?
Yeah, Marco Rubio
That's
tweeted.
awesome.
He's like, can somebody explain that to me? Like,
That's awesome.
because this is the question me and Mark. Like, look, I understand you're weary of surprise, especially Florida. 2000 is always on the mind, but this is not 2000, and this isn't Bush.
You know why
v.
this
Gore.
is karma for me, as it relates to Florida, is because in South Florida, that is where Barack Obama went to campaign for Joe Biden. And not only is Joe Biden getting crushed in the state of Florida, but South Florida, which was traditionally very blue, has now flipped 2 Dem congressional seats to Republican congressional seats.
Yeah,
And it's like, take that, Barack Obama. Stop campaigning for other people. You had your 8
going
years.
to make Florida reliably conservative. If like the amount of inroads that we're doing in southern Florida, and flipping some of these seats is really going to be indicative of just how that state is shifting and how, you can send Barack Obama there all you want, but it's not 2008 anymore.
No, it's such a different time. It is such a different time. And I hope the same thing carries in Pennsylvania, where obviously they deployed Barack in Pennsylvania, I believe in Philly, and they certainly had him deployed in Detroit.
The odds shark has just tweeted Donald Trump has moved to an 600%, minus 600. So he is a far and away favorite to win the presidency right now.
According to the bettors.
According to the bettors according to the bettors. And hell, if there's anything I trust, it's the gamblers.
How can only 91% of the precincts be in Florida? I mean, come on. I know that obviously the Panhandle, the polls close later, but come on. So Donald Trump is up by about 300,000 votes in Georgia. That's what it looked like. Oh, good. Okay, so podcast listeners, we got an old-fashioned recipe from
Mom,
Who?
relax on
Who?
the comments. I'm just kidding, Mom.
Who?
That's my mother.
That's your mom?
Mom, Amy Kelly Lee Lims.
Is that your mom?
Hi, Mom.
Really? She's the one that sent it?
Yeah.
Okay,
I heart
podcast
my
listeners,
number one
Garrick's
fan.
mother sent an old-fashioned recipe. Thank you, Garrick's mother.
Hey, I heart my fans. I gotta get I love you, Mom tattooed on my shoulder.
His biggest fan. Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks. It sounded like those guys on South Park. When
The first
they were
thing I
driving
knew-
the electric cars. Thanks.
I would like to thank my mother.
I'd like to thank my
Hi,
mother.
Mom.
So, Florida, will you please report the rest of your precincts? 91% are in. How can you not have 100% in? It is what time? It is 10:23. You've got to have them. Come on. And that means, wait a minute. How far is Donald Trump ahead in Florida, podcast listeners?
400,000 votes.
About 400,000 votes, approximately. Close to 400,000 votes.
4.5 percentage points right now.
That's a quite an insurmountable lead for Florida. I think that's pretty much done for Joe Biden. North Carolina, quite frankly, is still far too close to call. It is, including for Tillis. But Tillis,
I mean, Trump's ahead right now, but it's
of the tool.
It's
Is that his mom still saying stuff?
hey,
Thanks, Mom.
I'm not gonna hear the end of this for a little while. Nob Hill. I'm a big Kentucky
Oh, yeah,
Gentleman
Nob Hill.
fan, and
Nob
by that
Hill.
I mean
Nob Hill's good.
it's an $8 bottle at the liquor store.
So look, we still have basically the Midwest, right? We have Ohio, we have Michigan, we have Wisconsin, and we have Minnesota. We also have Arizona. But we need to lock down, of course, Georgia, which is looking relatively good, and we need to lock down, of course, the great state of North Carolina. But here's the thing: the Democrats also spent a ton of money on the state of Georgia.
Oh my
And didn't
God!
they deploy Barack Obama there in Atlanta?
I'm pretty sure he was
I
there.
think Obama went to
I'm
Atlanta.
pretty sure Biden spent a lot of time in Georgia,
And they spent a lot of money in Georgia too, because they're counting on the suburbs.
Atlanta
in
especially.
Atlanta, yes, absolutely in Atlanta, to flip the entire state. They're trying to do that whole Northern Virginia thing, right? Where Northern Virginia flips the whole state. They're trying to get Atlanta to flip the whole state of Georgia.
I know California hasn't closed yet, and I know California is going to be like a fourth
It's going to be a
million
blowout.
vote margin here. But it is very interesting to see that this late in the night, Trump is still ahead pretty significantly in the popular vote, because I'm pretty sure by this time last year we already knew that Trump wasn't going to win the popular vote.
Absolutely. And here's the thing, for podcast listeners, if you have Democrat friends who say we need to get rid of the Electoral College, then ask them this question. Why would a President Trump or a President Biden, why would they as candidates ever go to all those small towns in Pennsylvania and campaign if we were going to go just by a popular vote? Why would they go to Michigan, to the small towns? Why would they go to Wisconsin? Why would they go to Minnesota? Why would they go?
Like, I hear this argument a lot, and it makes sense. But the argument that I always fall back on is what is this country? It is not, a big national place with a national vote. We are a compact of states. We are 50 independent states that have come together to make a country, and each state should have a say in who their elected leader is.
Well
because
said.
Otherwise, you have 3 or 4 states that dominate. It provides a balance. It keeps these big states from taking for granted the little guy. I mean, you look at all these flyover states, but what is those flyover states? We talked about Montana earlier today, Iowa, Kansas. That's the bread bowl of America. I mean, where do you think we get all of our food? Everybody dunks on Iowa for being, all the liberals dunk on Iowa. It's like, every 4 years they want to be important. So
they also show up in their overalls.
Yeah.
They try to act like they're all folksy when they go to Iowa. All the liberals do,
You're a liberal vegan. Where do you get your soy-based products, ladies and gentlemen? Iowa farmers, So stop taking the little guy for granted. Stop bitching about the Electoral College. Go out and make inroads. Go out and bring your message to, I will always say that the issue isn't the system. It's how you play the game in the system.
So podcast listeners, you got to go on Mark and the Millennials Facebook page and look at what we just posted about the blue wave. It's pretty funny.
It was a
blue wave. It's 2 Johnnies on the spot.
Johnny's on the spot.
That's the blue wave. So that came from one of our listeners, just so you know. He sent it to me directly. But look, back to the Electoral College. For me, and Garrick did an excellent job explaining how we are independent, 50 independent states that are governed independently. But my issue with getting rid of the Electoral College, other than the million different explanations that you've heard over time, is that there would be no incentive for any candidate in the future without an Electoral College to visit small towns and to visit states that otherwise, I think the Democrat Party don't count. They see them as flyover states, and they just don't count. They're going to go to Illinois, California, New York, and probably Massachusetts.
The Republicans would do the same thing. The entire shape of how we approach elections would be vastly different, because Donald Trump would spend all of his time in New York, California. Is he going to win those states, those places? No, but what he's going to be doing is focusing on running up the margins, or at least making them a lot more competitive than they are.
And you would feel really insignificant, I think. I know I would, if you lived in a state where presidents just said, I don't ever have to go to your state, because of the fact that it doesn't have the population girth that's required to get elected. So therefore, I'm not going to do it. Whereas the Electoral College forces candidates to focus on places that they otherwise would never go to.
So
that's a good thing.
One of those 2 Miami, Southern Florida seats we're talking about, a Latino Republican woman named Maria Elvira Salazar handedly beats long rep Donna Shalala in Florida's 27th district. I think that's South Florida. Right? I mean, that's in Miami, basically. And it's nice to see, again, a woman, a Latino woman in the Republican Party, diversity there, joining the tent, taking it to Democrats in a very Democratic area.
Yes, to do when she has a Republican Party that is more diverse in the House of Representatives. And what are the Democrats going to do if John James wins Michigan?
Yep.
If John James wins Michigan and goes to the United States Senate, you're going to then have Tim Scott from a deep southern state.
In the shock of the night here, the president of the National Teachers Association is a Joe Biden supporter. It also looks like she has purple hair. Not that I have an issue with purple hair, but
She's the head of the National Teachers Association?
I believe she is. Otherwise, I don't know why the hell you'd have her on Fox. But
she kind of looks like an angry Biden voter. I mean, that's just kind of what comes off there to me.
The teachers union has been running a racket during COVID. I mean, good Lord.
Yeah.
They want their cake and to eat it, too.
And by the way, we should make clear, we don't mean the rank and file teachers. We think just the teachers union, because the rank and file teachers are terrific. But the teachers union, I mean, have you heard them speak? I mean, the head of the National Association,
and
NEA,
I'll say that most teachers, like they're not partisans. They're the union as a structure maybe, but the people who exist in it, they're not hardline Democrats. They're people who just want to elect the best candidate that they see fit for them. I know a lot of teachers. I'm from a very Republican area in New Jersey, and a lot of the teachers that I talk to are Republicans. One of my teachers, she was married to my local assemblyman. It's just it's a shame to see how unions use their power and authority to kind of like pigeonhole their employees into being agents of a party that they don't support.
Exactly.
That's why I thought the Janus decision, which basically made it so you can't force them to pay dues to be used for the purposes of campaigning. I thought that was so important for freedom of expression, freedom of employment, to be able to do things without having to to be required to be a partisan for a cause you don't believe in.
Well said. And I have to say that
and that's why the courts are so important, and conservative judges that McConnell's done, and why ACB was so important, Kavanaugh was important, Gorsuch was important. I mean, people gave McConnell a lot of flack, but holding up that Scalia seat in 16 might be one of the most important plays in Senate history for
absolutely,
for the sake of the Constitution, the sake of fair, independent, a judiciary that reads the laws and interprets the Constitution based on sound constitutional theory.
He's masterful. And I have to tell you that it is true, of course, that the rank and file teachers are fabulous, but the teachers union is not. But I do have to say this: there are those individual teachers from time to time, and we hear about them from time to time, who basically go after a student who says, "Oh, well, I like Donald Trump," and then the teacher lectures the child and says, "Well, you can't say that. That's wrong. He's a racist or he's bad." I mean, in my own county, there's a teacher that did that, and they went after a student, and the parents, of course, had to go in and talk to the administration and say, "Look, my child is in class, and part of learning is to be a critical thinker. This is what my child thinks. The fact that the teacher doesn't think the same way is actually fine, but it's not the teacher's job to tell you can't think a certain way, and that's not allowed to be discussed in class. Who do they think they are?"
That happened at my alma mater, Toms River North. So there was a student, he was a Trump supporter, and he got a Trump flag, and it was hanging up in his room, and he was at his desk, Zoom schooling, because that's what we're doing these days. And one of his teachers saw it and told him to either take it down or exit the Zoom room. And his mother went to the school, and the superintendent agreed that it was improper. But this is how I guess a lack of critical. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but like a lack of critical thinking and incentivizing kids to explore things on their own. Like, I don't care what side of the aisle you fall on, but did you come to there in a way of critical thinking? Did you weigh the issues and apply them the way you see fit? Because, nobody should be able to tell you what you can or can't believe in.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And apparently the Democrats were also in panic mode because there was a long-held seat in Oregon, of all places, where a GOP newcomer might actually oust a long-serving Democrat congressman, because that just doesn't happen in Oregon. Let's just face it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen in
They
Oregon.
have called it. Tommy Tuberville has joined the United States Senate, beating incumbent Senator Doug Jones.
Hey, all right, Alabama, +1.
Alabama +1.
+1 for the Republican
We are
Senate.
now neutral in the Senate makeup currently.
That's right. So we lost Cory Gardner from
and we
Colorado.
have picked up Tommy Tuberville, which is, in my opinion, the funniest Senate candidate senator. So, Donald Trump is president, and he's an outsider, but, he was a business person, He made money, he was a real estate developer, and he had a background in business and finance. Tommy Tuberville was a college football coach, And I mean, legislative experience, none.
0.
Business experience, none.
0.
Legal experience, none. I mean, he basically was just like, I'm going to coach college football. And then he was like, hell, it's Alabama. Anything can happen.
That's right.
And Alabama was like, hell yeah, Tommy Tupperville. And they elected him.
Yeah, and he's also going to go to the United States Senate, and he's going to say, we need to open up all the football games, and they need to start playing again. That's going to be his top issue. And he's probably right, by the way.
Here's going to be the wildest thing. I think that is going to be – I think that, like, in retrospect, how in a lot of these Midwest states, like Ohio, how important Trump being involved in getting certain college football conferences to play again.
I think that
he had a huge impact.
Yes.
Because I think people really – like, I don't think a lot of liberals on the coast necessarily understand how big football culture is in America. Like, I did a drive when my mother moved to Texas. We drove
especially when you don't have a professional team.
No, exactly. Like, you're in a state like Alabama where, like, the Crimson Tide and Auburn football are, like, the world stops for that on Saturday. Like, it is huge.
And professional sports
Ohio State and Ohio, Michigan and state of Michigan. I mean, like, it's so pivotal, like, to people's ways of life that, like, I don't think people truly understand.
But don't you agree also that that's also because professional sports have been poisoned by BLM and by activism? Because when you go to sports, at least this is the way I grew up, when you would go to a sports game, no matter what it was, a professional
you go
game,
to escape life.
That is the one place you go where you were united with people of all different races and all different religions and all different backgrounds, and you want your team to win, and so you're together. And then fast forward to 2020, and really the last 5 or 6 years, it's all been poisoned because now you have people bringing their politics onto the field. You're like, I didn't come here to see that.
So here's the thing. Like, I was talking about this with my dad the other day because I think he comes from this much the same place that you do. It's like, you know, no matter what was going on in the world, like sports was an escape. You know,
it was an escape.
You all came together and you watched your team, and it was a distraction from the real world. But it's like now the real world is infected everything. It's like everywhere you go, like politics is just in your face, and it's like there's no getting away from it. And it's, you know, like, for instance, let's look at, this is going to be such a weird, like, you know, relationship here, but like I have been, you know, I hop on social media every day to go check on the news, and all I get plastered with, like, I'm looking for things that are unrelated to the election, but all I get is, have you voted yet? I'm like, Jesus, like, relax, like, give me a second here. I mean, yes, I've already voted. Can I opt out of all these internet ads, please, for the love of God? But, you know, this is what the world is, what the United States is. It's so divided. It's so toxic right now.
And thank you to ESPN for making it even worse. I mean, ESPN, they keep losing viewership by the millions, and it's because when you watch ESPN, instead of watching updates on sports and players and teams, all you're hearing about is politics. Yeah. You're like,
so ESPN,
don't you guys get it?
ESPN on their radio, on their radio show, which is like, ESPN radio is actually very popular. Like, that's why I like to listen to sports radio when I'm in the car. They had a host from 3 to 6 o'clock. His name was Will Kane. He's currently now on Fox News as a contributor on the Saturday morning show. But he is, you know, he was a known conservative, but they basically kicked him off the air because he didn't espouse the political views that the network wanted. And it's like,
I agree.
You know, it's like, who the hell
we
cares?
should do a podcast just on this because seriously, this is an important issue.
Because it's like, who the hell cares? Like, what my ESPN radio host politics are? Because
I agree.
You know.
So we're going to wrap this up with Mark and the Millennials. We're going to wrap this up because the night's going to go on.
We're not going to know for a while.
Yes, but we really appreciate you joining Mark and the Millennials. I want to thank Garrick Ross, who's back tan, rested, and ready from law school. He gets to go back tomorrow to the grind, which I know he's really looking forward to. Not
hell yeah.
And I want to thank our producer, Christopher Hopkins, for making this happen tonight. And, of course, Mojo Cigars in Annapolis, Maryland. We'll see you next time. Join us. Please connect with us. Subscribe, YouTube, Facebook. Listen to us on Spotify and iTunes. See you next time.